The city was a maze of steel and neon, a web of towering buildings and dim alleys shrouded in perpetual dusk. Beneath the sleek veneer lay a darker undercurrent, one Alex had grown all too familiar with. He was an orphan, a nobody plucked from the streets and shaped by a secret organization into something other than human. A weapon, they called him, though he had once dreamed of being something more. The organization had found him as a child, wandering the desolate streets, looking for scraps. Even then, the flashes of the future had come to him unbidden, visions flickering like static on a broken screen. He could see things that hadn't happened yet, things that would happen unless they were changed. The organization had seen potential in his ability, and he'd been whisked away to their facility, a cold, sterile place where children like him were trained and molded. Under their watchful eyes, Alex's life became a cycle of discipline, training, and obedience, punctuated only by his visions. They'd nurtured his power, honed his mind, and sharpened his senses until he was a precise, calculated weapon, but then the vision came. It was a routine day in the training hall, his handler overseeing him, when the scene hit him, a tidal wave of death, of devastation on a scale that defied imagination. He saw buildings crumbling, oceans rising, a darkness that spread over the world, consuming everything. But something was wrong. The vision, so often clear, was fragmented, shrouded in fog. Faces and locations slipped through his grasp, details lost to a haze that only deepened his dread, and then it vanished, leaving Alex shaken. For the first time in his life, he'd glimpsed something beyond his control, a threat that he sensed had been buried, hidden from him. The vision haunted him, resurfacing in his mind at every quiet moment. His handler, sensing his unease, asked if he was troubled. Alex lied, but the fear gnawed at him. The organization had taught him loyalty, conditioned him to serve their ends. But this, whatever he had seen, went beyond duty or loyalty. It was survival. That night, alone in his quarters, Alex made his decision. If he was to understand this threat, he needed to be free from the organization's grasp. For once, he would follow a future of his own making. With careful precision, he prepared his escape. His training had included nearly every conceivable skill, from combat to infiltration. But the organization was no fool. They monitored everything, watched every movement. Alex's escape would be his final test. When the time came, he slipped through the facility's corridors like a shadow, moving past security checkpoints, bypassing the systems designed to trap him. The sense of urgency sharpened his senses. For once, he was not acting under orders but his own instincts, his own determination. His mind was racing, but his body moved with practiced grace. And when he finally burst into the open air, the city lights stretching out before him, he felt an exhilaration he hadn't known was possible. The night swallowed him up as he disappeared into the underbelly of the city, knowing the organization would soon be hunting him. But he also knew he couldn't do this alone. He would need allies, people who could see the cracks in the world as he did, people who wouldn't be afraid of the truth. He would need a team. Alex's first recruit was Lisa, a hacker he'd heard whispers about during his missions. She was an enigma, a ghost in the digital world, known for infiltrating the most secure networks and uncovering secrets hidden even from governments. Finding her was no small feat, but Alex's precognition gave him an edge. He found her holed up in a rundown apartment on the edge of the city, surrounded by computer monitors casting a dim glow over the cluttered room. She was slender, with a fierce gaze and a skepticism that could slice through steel. "What's a ghost like you doing in my domain?" she asked, barely looking up from her screen as he entered. "I need your help," Alex replied, cutting straight to the point. He had no time for small talk. The vision still weighed heavily on him. "Everyone needs my help," she shot back, fingers still tapping away. Doesn't mean I give it. Do you give it to people who know things before they happen? He countered, letting a hint of his power show. Her hands froze, her eyes darting to his face. You're either insane or... She let the sentence hang, intrigue flickering across her face. In a city teeming with lies, she'd found someone who might finally offer the truth. Over the course of the night, Alex revealed what he knew about the organization, about his powers, about the vision of doom he couldn't fully comprehend. Lisa's skepticism faded as he spoke, replaced by a calculating intensity. By dawn, she had joined him, her curiosity and her disdain for the organization outweighing her distrust. With Lisa's connections and resources, they tracked down their next ally, a man who went by the name Damien. He was a former soldier, enhanced with experimental technology that gave him strength and resilience beyond normal human limits. Alex found him fighting in underground rings, his power and anger barely contained, a man running from a past he refused to acknowledge. You must be joking, Damien said when Alex approached him after a fight, his expression flat. You want me to save the world? Try someone else. Alex stood his ground, the quiet confidence of his vision guiding him. It's not about saving the world, he said. It's about stopping people who think they own it. I've seen what's coming, Damien. We need your strength, and you need a reason to use it. Damien's eyes narrowed, studying him, as if weighing the truth of his words. Then, with a reluctant nod, he agreed, his own scars lending him a dark resolve that Alex knew would be essential. Their team grew once more with the addition of Selena, a scientist who had once worked for the same organization. She had been a prodigy, developing nanotechnology with incredible healing properties, but her conscience had driven her away when she saw the horrors her work was used for. Alex found her hiding in a forgotten part of the city, spending her days treating those who could not afford medical help, her talents buried in obscurity. At first, Selena was wary of Alex's intentions. But as he explained the vision and the impending threat, she saw in him the same spark of defiance that had once burned in her own heart. If we do this, she warned, there's no turning back. The organization will hunt us down. They're already hunting me, Alex replied. I'd rather go down fighting for something that matters. And so, their team was forged, a ragtag group bound not by duty but by a shared determination to confront the looming disaster. They were all outcasts, misfits, but in each other, they found a new sense of purpose. The organization's response was swift and brutal. Barely a week after assembling, Alex and his team were ambushed in an abandoned warehouse where they had been gathering supplies. Operatives descended like phantoms, their skills and weapons sharp as steel. The first wave took them by surprise, bullets ricocheting off walls as shadows moved through the dimly lit space. Damien took point, his enhanced muscles propelling him into the fray, his fists connecting with devastating force. Lisa's fingers danced over her tablet, disrupting enemy communications, throwing off their coordination. Selena's quick thinking and advanced nanobots helped keep Damien and Alex on their feet, the devices sealing wounds almost as quickly as they were inflicted. But the real test came when Alex's precognition failed him. One moment, he could see every step, every threat before it materialized. The next, his mind went blank. A wave of panic threatened to overtake him. Without his visions, he felt vulnerable, exposed. Yet, as he fought beside his team, he realized they were no longer depending solely on him. They had become a unit, each one compensating for the other's weaknesses, their synergy forged through necessity. The attackers retreated, leaving them battered but alive. In the aftermath, Alex's mind buzzed with questions. Why had his vision failed? And more urgently, what did it mean for the coming disaster? Lisa approached him, wiping sweat from her brow. "You said you could see the future. What happened back there?" Alex stared at his hands, the uncertainty gnawing at him. "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever's coming, it's stronger than anything I've ever faced. We're in the dark now." They exchanged grim looks, the weight of their mission settling over them like a shroud. In the days that followed the ambush, the weight of Alex's lost visions lingered. His ability had been his guiding light, and without it, every move felt precarious, like navigating a maze in the dark. But his team's loyalty was unshaken. They pressed forward, relying on their combined skills and instincts, growing closer as each day passed. Despite the constant threat of the organization's operatives tracking them, a strange comfort settled among them. There was strength in their unity, and for the first time, Alex felt what it meant to truly belong. One night, as they huddled in an abandoned factory on the city's outskirts, Alex sat with Lisa, studying a digital map of the city. Their target was a facility rumored to hold data that might shed light on the catastrophe he had foreseen. Damien sat nearby, checking his weapons, while Selena quietly calibrated her nanotech devices. Alex's fingers traced the map, his mind racing, hoping for a flicker of his old foresight. But it never came. Lisa glanced at him. "You really can't see anything?" Alex shook his head, frustration tightening his chest. "It's like trying to catch smoke. Every time I reach for it, it slips away. All I see is nothing." Lisa watched him, sympathy softening her expression. "You're not alone in this, Alex. Vision or no vision, we're in this together." He managed a small nod, her words comforting him more than he wanted to admit. Lisa's confidence grounded him, reminding him that his power wasn't the only thing that defined him. He had people who would fight beside him even in the face of the unknown. The next morning, they set out, each carrying the grim knowledge that the organization's forces would likely be waiting. They approached the facility, an imposing structure nestled among industrial buildings, its walls fortified and its windows darkened. As they moved closer, Lisa tapped her tablet, disrupting the facility's surveillance systems. Damien took point, his shoulders tense with readiness, while Selena and Alex stayed close behind. The silence was oppressive as they entered the building, navigating dimly lit corridors, each step calculated, cautious. But halfway through, an alarm blared, shattering the quiet. Alex's heart pounded as footsteps echoed from down the hall. They were cornered. Damien surged forward, his enhanced body barreling into the approaching guards with a force that made the walls shudder. Lisa hacked into the facility system, sealing doors to block reinforcements, her fingers flying over the screen. The sound of gunfire ricocheted through the corridor, and Alex and Selena ducked, searching for cover. "Alex, focus!" Lisa yelled, her voice sharp above the chaos. "We need a way out." Alex clenched his fists, straining, willing his mind to conjure even the faintest hint of foresight. But his power remained stubbornly silent. Gritting his teeth, he scanned the room, his instincts kicking in. He spotted an exit sign at the far end of the hall, and with a surge of adrenaline, he led his team toward it. They burst through the door, finding themselves in a loading dock surrounded by stacks of crates. But the relief was short-lived. More operatives closed in, blocking every exit. The odds were against them, and Alex felt a knot of despair twist in his chest. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and he was powerless. Damien's voice rang out, fierce and defiant. "I've got this. Go!" Before Alex could protest, Damien launched himself at the advancing guards, his fists and body a whirlwind of strength and fury. He was a one-man army, his presence a protective wall between his friends and their enemies. Alex hesitated, the thought of leaving him behind clawing at his mind, but Damien's voice was resolute. "Get the intel and get out of here. I'll hold them off." With a heavy heart, Alex nodded, pulling Lisa and Selena toward an open doorway. They ran, the sounds of Damien's battle fading behind them, and Alex's chest tightened with guilt. They had left him, but he knew it was the only choice if they were to accomplish their mission. They sprinted through the facility, finally reaching the main server room. Lisa's eyes lit up, her fingers flying as she hacked into the system, pulling up data streams and decrypting files. Alex and Selena stood guard, alert for any sign of the enemy. After what felt like an eternity, Lisa's voice broke the silence. "Got it," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Alex, it's worse than we thought." He leaned over her shoulder, scanning the screen. The files revealed the organization's endgame, a plan to unleash a global catastrophe they called Project Rebirth, a disaster designed to destabilize the world, allowing them to rise from the ashes as its rulers. The vision Alex had seen was no natural occurrence, it was engineered, orchestrated by the very people who had trained him. Selena's face was pale. "They're planning a world reset. Alex, if we don't stop this, millions will die." Alex's jaw clenched. The weight of the truth settled over him like a shroud, his stomach twisting with anger and determination. He had been a pawn, his powers manipulated for a scheme that would end life as they knew it. But no more. He was done being their weapon. Lisa downloaded the files onto a drive, pocketing it before they turned to leave. But as they moved toward the exit, a figure stepped into their path, a tall, imposing man with a cold smile and eyes that gleamed with deadly intent. "Going somewhere?" The man's voice was smooth, almost mocking. "Did you think we'd let you walk out of here with our secrets?" Alex's heart pounded as he recognized the man, his former handler, the one who had overseen his training, molded him into the tool they needed. The handler's gaze bore into him, a look of disappointment and twisted amusement. "Alex," the man continued, voice like silk. "You were my finest creation. And now look at you, betraying us, for what? Freedom? A purpose? You're nothing without us." Rage boiled up in Alex's chest, but he forced himself to stay calm, to focus. "I'm more than you ever made me, and you'll see that soon enough." The handler chuckled, drawing a sleek pistol from his coat. Bold words from a man out of options. But before he could pull the trigger, Selena stepped forward, her nanobots whirring to life, creating a protective barrier between them. The handler's shot bounced off the barrier, his surprise evident. Alex seized the moment, tackling him to the ground, the two grappling in a fierce struggle. "You can't fight us all, Alex," the handler hissed, shoving him back. "We built you. We know your every weakness." Alex gritted his teeth, pushing himself to his feet. "Maybe you knew the old me. But I've changed." He glanced at Lisa, who nodded, activating a device she'd rigged to overload the facility's power grid. The lights flickered, a hum building in the walls, and the handler's eyes widened. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" he snarled, backing away. "Yes," Alex replied, his voice steady. "Ending this." The team bolted, sprinting through the hallways as the building's power surged, explosions echoing behind them. They burst into the open air, barely making it to safety before a massive explosion ripped through the facility, flames lighting up the sky. They watched in silence, the weight of their victory tempered by the cost. Damien was gone, sacrificed so they could bring down the organization's stronghold. But as the smoke rose, Alex felt a strange sense of peace. He was no longer a weapon, no longer bound by the chains of his past. His vision might have failed him, but he had forged a path all his own, with people he trusted. The fight wasn't over, they had only dismantled a single piece of the organization's plan. But for the first time, Alex was ready, not with foresight, but with the strength of his team and the fire of his purpose. As they turned away from the wreckage, Alex knew they would face whatever came next together, bound by a new resolve and a future they would create, no matter how uncertain it might be. Ethan Reed leaned back against the cold concrete wall of the subway station, breathing heavily. His pulse thrummed in his ears, and his fingers trembled with leftover energy from whatever had just happened. Around him, the station was silent, frozen in an eerie stillness. The bustling crowd that had filled the platform moments before was now motionless, as if caught in a photograph. He took a shaky step forward, his footfalls echoing in the silence. A woman in a business suit stood mid-stride, her foot hovering just above the ground, her eyes wide with alarm frozen on her face. A young boy with a baseball cap was suspended in mid-jump, his hand outstretched toward a balloon drifting just out of reach. Ethan swallowed hard, a chill crawling down his spine. What the hell had just happened? As he took another tentative step, a strange pressure released, and sound rushed back into the world. The hum of fluorescent lights, the screech of a distant train, the chatter of commuters, it all crashed over him, and the crowd resumed its movement as if nothing had happened. The woman completed her step, the boy landed, and the balloon floated upward, unhindered. Ethan blinked, trying to steady his breathing. Nobody seemed to notice the lapse in time, as if it hadn't happened at all. He squeezed his eyes shut, his mind racing. This wasn't the first time he'd experienced something strange. Over the past few weeks, he'd felt occasional blips, brief moments when time seemed to bend or slow around him, but nothing like this. He brushed his hands over his face, trying to ground himself. Maybe he was just exhausted, sleep-deprived from his grueling shifts at the hospital. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. The sound of his phone buzzing jolted him back to reality. He pulled it from his pocket, grateful for the distraction, and saw a text from his best friend, Liam Torres, ****, Liam ****, hey man, where you at? Don't tell me you bailed again, ****, Ethan sighed, tapping out a quick reply. He hadn't bailed intentionally. He'd just gotten a little sidetracked. Later that night, Ethan found himself nursing a beer at their usual dive bar, waiting for Liam to arrive. The dim lights and faded vinyl seats brought a strange sense of comfort, grounding him after the bizarre incident in the subway. So, you're alive, Liam's familiar voice came from behind him. Ethan looked up, managing a weak smile as Liam slid into the booth across from him. With his military-cut hair and broad shoulders, Liam looked like he belonged in a battlefield rather than a dive bar. But his easy grin and relaxed demeanor made him one of the few people Ethan felt he could trust. Barely, Ethan replied, his voice tinged with sarcasm. Long day. Yeah. You look like you've seen a ghost. Liam flagged down the bartender, ordering a beer. Or maybe 3. Ethan hesitated, the words forming on his lips before he pushed them back. How could he explain what he'd experienced? Just work stuff. You know how it is. Right. Liam eyed him suspiciously. Well, I've got a new job coming up. A security gig, out near the old research labs. Pays well, and it'll keep me from going stir-crazy. Ethan nodded absently, his mind drifting back to the frozen subway station, to the woman mid-step and the boy mid-jump. The details haunted him, lingering at the edges of his mind. Finally, unable to hold it in any longer, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. Something weird happened today, Liam. Liam raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. Ethan took a deep breath. I was at the subway station, and I don't know, time just stopped. For a second, Liam's expression was blank, then he broke into laughter, slapping the table. Man, you need to cut down on the late shifts. You're starting to sound like one of those sci-fi conspiracy nuts. I'm serious, Liam, Ethan insisted, his voice steady. Everything stopped. People, sounds, everything was frozen, just for a few seconds. And it's happened before, but not like that. The laughter faded from Liam's face, replaced by a look of genuine concern. You're not messing with me, are you? Ethan shook his head, his hands clenching into fists. I don't know what's happening to me, Liam. But whatever it is, it's getting stronger. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Ethan's confession settling between them. Finally, Liam cleared his throat, glancing around the bar as if to make sure no one was listening. Look, he said quietly, I know a guy. Used to work with some scientists in genetics. Rumor has it, they were doing experiments, something about enhancing human abilities. Maybe he can help you figure this out. Ethan's heart pounded. Part of him wanted to brush it off as another conspiracy theory, but another part, the part that had felt the pulse of energy freezing the world around him, knew there might be a grain of truth. All right, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Let's meet him. The next day, Ethan found himself outside an unassuming building on the outskirts of town. It looked like an abandoned warehouse, its windows cracked and covered in grime. But inside, the air buzzed with a strange energy, and Ethan's skin prickled with anticipation. Liam led him down a dark hallway until they reached a small, cluttered office. Behind the desk sat an older man with graying hair and sharp, calculating eyes. He looked up as they entered, and a sly smile spread across his face. You must be Ethan, he said, his voice smooth and uncomfortably calm. I've heard about your situation. Ethan glanced at Liam, who gave him a reassuring nod. Yeah, that's me. And you are? Dr. Cale Voss, the man replied, extending a hand. Ethan shook it hesitantly, feeling a faint jolt of energy from the man's grip. I believe you're here to understand the changes you're experiencing. Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on Voss. I don't understand what's happening to me. But I know it's not normal. Voss leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in his lap. You're right, it's not normal. But it's not entirely unexpected, either. You see, for years, we've been exploring the potential of human evolution, experimenting with genetic modifications. Some of these changes were intended to be subtle, undetectable. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together the implications of Voss's words. So, you did this to me? To all of us? Not directly, Voss replied, his tone dismissive. Our methods involve the introduction of alien genetic material, altering the very building blocks of human DNA. In essence, we were simply guiding the natural course of evolution. Guiding? Ethan echoed, his voice thick with disbelief. You're talking about manipulating us like lab rats. Voss shrugged, unfazed. Wouldn't you say humans have done the same to other species? We're only expediting what would happen over millennia. And those like you, the gifted, the evolved, are proof of our success. Ethan's stomach churned with anger and disgust, but he kept his expression steady. And what's the endgame here? Why go through all this trouble? A faint smile played on Voss's lips, his eyes gleaming with a cold, detached amusement. Because humanity is flawed, Ethan. And if left unchecked, your species will destroy itself. We're here to ensure a better path, a world where evolved humans serve as leaders, guiding the rest. Leaders? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, a mix of disbelief and horror. You're talking about controlling us. Call it guidance, if you prefer, Voss replied, his tone almost patronizing. You and the others have a choice. Embrace your evolution, or, he trailed off, his gaze icy and unyielding. Ethan clenched his fists, feeling the faint hum of energy beneath his skin. He was ready to lash out, to make a stand, but Liam's hand on his shoulder held him back. Let's go, Liam said quietly, steering him out of the office. Outside, Ethan's mind spun with anger and fear. His powers, his very identity, it was all part of some grand alien experiment. He felt like a pawn, trapped in a game he didn't understand, his life no longer his own. But as he walked alongside Liam, a resolve settled over him. He wasn't alone. Others were out there, people like him, caught in the same web of lies and manipulation. We need to find them, he said, his voice steady. The others like me. We can't just let these aliens control us. Liam nodded, a determined look in his eyes. Then let's build an army. Ethan and Liam worked tirelessly, their efforts rewarded as they found others like themselves, individuals whose lives had been upended by abilities they didn't understand. First was Sophia Chen, a quiet, brilliant biologist who could manipulate her body at the cellular level. When Ethan and Liam met her, she was hiding in a cramped lab, buried beneath research notes and old, hastily packed boxes. She was skeptical at first, reluctant to believe Ethan's story of alien manipulation. But after some prodding, she agreed to come with them. Her scientific curiosity piqued. Then came Marcus, a soft-spoken artist with the unsettling power of telekinesis. He kept mostly to himself, haunted by his newfound ability to move objects without touching them. Each person they found came with their own story, their own burden to bear. Some had already suspected the truth, while others were horrified by the idea that they were part of an alien experiment. 22. As their numbers grew, so did their resolve. What had started as Ethan's quest for answers had transformed into a collective mission, to resist the alien influence that threatened their freedom. Together, they formed an alliance, meeting in secret, training to hone their abilities. Underneath it all, however, was the knowledge that they were woefully outmatched. Dr. Voss and his people had resources, technology, and a plan that spanned decades, if not longer. Ethan's powers continued to develop, his control over time sharpening with each practice session. What had once been chaotic, instinctual bursts became something he could call upon almost at will. He could slow time for a few precious seconds, creating a bubble around himself and anyone close to him, giving his team the advantage they needed to escape or to strike with precision. But he soon learned there were limits. The strain of holding time still, even for a moment, left him drained and disoriented, and he knew that pushing himself too far could be deadly. One evening, after an exhausting training session, Ethan found Sophia in the lab they'd converted into a makeshift base. She was studying a sequence of DNA on a computer screen, her face drawn with concentration. Sophia, he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her expression weary but determined. Ethan, she said, offering a faint smile. I think I've found something. She gestured for him to come closer, pointing at a series of markers on the screen. These genetic modifications, they're designed to be dormant, activated only under specific conditions. It's almost as if the aliens planted these traits, waiting for the right moment to awaken them. Ethan frowned, studying the lines of code he could barely understand. So they've been watching us this whole time, waiting for these abilities to surface? Sophia nodded grimly. And controlling the activation process. This isn't natural evolution, it's a calculated design. They want us to feel like we're progressing, but they're pulling the strings. Ethan clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. Then we need to find a way to break free of it, to shut down whatever's controlling us. Sophia hesitated, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one else was listening. There may be a way. But it's risky. Dr. Voss, he hinted at a transmitter, something that could amplify their control over us. If we destroy it, we might be able to sever their influence. The weight of her words hung in the air. Destroying the transmitter would mean a full-scale assault on an alien-controlled facility, an operation that could easily end in disaster. But if they succeeded, they could finally break free. As they shared a silent understanding, Liam approached, his eyes alight with determination. So, when do we go in? Ethan took a deep breath, looking between Liam and Sophia, the gravity of their decision settling heavily on his shoulders. We go in as soon as we're ready. This might be our only chance. 2 nights later, the group stood gathered around a rough map of the alien facility, the dim light casting long shadows over their faces. Ethan went over the plan one final time, his voice steady despite the nerves gnawing at him. We move quickly, stay together, he said. I'll create a time bubble when we get close to the transmitter, but we have to be fast. We only get one shot at this. Liam and Marcus nodded, their faces hardened with resolve. Sophia took a deep breath, clutching a small vial of serum she'd created, a last-ditch attempt to strengthen her own abilities if things went south. With everything set, they moved out, slipping through the quiet streets under the cover of darkness. The alien facility loomed ahead, its silhouette cutting against the night sky, an imposing reminder of the forces they were up against. Ethan's heart pounded as they approached the main entrance, his senses heightened by the anticipation of what lay ahead. They encountered the first line of security guards just outside the building, a mix of humans and aliens, patrolling in pairs. With a nod to Liam, Ethan concentrated, drawing on the energy within him. The world slowed around them, the guards' movements becoming sluggish as if they were wading through molasses. In this bubble of frozen time, Ethan signaled to his team, and they moved past the guards undetected, slipping into the facility. Inside, the sterile, metallic corridors stretched out before them, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. They advanced in silence, their footsteps barely making a sound. But as they rounded a corner, an alarm blared, piercing the quiet and shattering any hope of a stealthy approach. Go, go! Ethan shouted, pushing his powers to the limit as more guards flooded the hallways. Time slowed once again, allowing his team to evade the initial wave, but he knew he couldn't hold it for long. They needed to reach the transmitter, fast. With each step, Ethan's control wavered, his vision blurring as the strain of maintaining the time bubble took its toll. Sophia pressed ahead, her shape-shifting abilities allowing her to slip past guards and disable security systems, while Liam and Marcus held off their pursuers with a mixture of strength and telekinesis. Finally, they reached the heart of the facility, a cavernous chamber housing a towering structure of pulsing energy. The transmitter. It hummed with power, a low vibration that seemed to resonate with Ethan's very bones. Sophia's voice cut through the haze of exhaustion clouding his mind. Ethan, we need to destroy it now, before they reinforce. Ethan nodded, steadying himself as he extended a hand toward the transmitter, gathering the last of his strength. But before he could act, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. Well, well. I'm impressed, Ethan. Dr. Voss stepped into view, flanked by a squad of alien guards. His expression was calm, almost amused, As he surveyed the group with a mixture of disdain and curiosity, Ethan felt his stomach twist, but he held his ground, meeting Voss's gaze with defiance. "You're not going to win, Voss. We're not your experiments." Voss chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, Ethan. You misunderstand. This isn't about winning or losing, it's about progress. Humanity will evolve, whether you're ready for it or not. And I'm merely here to ensure that process goes smoothly. You call this evolution?" Ethan spat, gesturing to the transmitter. "All you're doing is creating slaves." "Perspective, my boy," Voss replied, his tone as condescending as ever. "Evolution is simply a means of control. It's all about guiding humanity toward a future where survival and order prevail. Unfortunately, it appears that you, and your little rebellion don't share that vision." Without warning, Voss raised a device in his hand, pressing a button. The transmitter surged with energy, casting an intense glow that filled the chamber. Ethan staggered, a wave of nausea crashing over him as his powers sputtered. Weakened by the transmitter's influence, the rest of the team faltered as well, their abilities dimming under the transmitter's oppressive force. Sophia fell to her knees, clutching her head as if fighting an internal battle. Liam struggled to keep his footing, his enhanced reflexes dulled, while Marcus could only watch helplessly as objects slipped from his telekinetic grasp. But despite the pain and the weight of defeat pressing down on him, Ethan forced himself to stand. He clenched his fists, summoning every ounce of defiance within him. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the transmitter. "We're stronger than this." In a final act of desperation, he focused on the energy within him, reaching deeper than he ever had before. The world slowed once again, and he felt a surge of power, raw and wild, coursing through his veins. Ignoring the agony tearing at his body, he took a step forward, each movement like pushing through solid rock. With a roar, he launched himself at the transmitter, plunging his hand into its core. The energy burned him, searing through his flesh, but he didn't stop. He poured everything he had into disrupting the machine, channeling his time manipulation abilities into the device. The transmitter shuddered, sparks flying as its systems began to overload. Alarms blared, and the aliens scrambled, their once calm demeanor replaced by panic. Dr. Voss watched in shock, a flicker of fear crossing his face as he realized the transmitter was about to go critical. Ethan released the device, stumbling back as it crackled and surged with unstable energy. In one final, deafening explosion, the transmitter shattered, sending a shockwave through the facility. The oppressive weight vanished, and Ethan collapsed to the ground, his vision dimming as exhaustion claimed him. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the look of pure rage on Voss's face, a look that promised retribution. When Ethan awoke, he was back in the makeshift lab, surrounded by his friends. Sophia sat nearby, her eyes filled with relief and worry as she reached out to steady him. "You did it," she said softly. "The transmitter's destroyed. They can't control us anymore." Ethan managed a weak smile, the pain in his body a reminder of the battle they'd won. But even as he lay there, he knew their fight wasn't over. They had won this battle, but the war against Voss and his alien kind was only beginning. With renewed determination, he looked at his team, the people who had fought beside him, who had risked everything to claim their freedom. They had faced unimaginable odds and come out stronger, bound by a purpose that transcended their individual powers. "Then let's get ready," he said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "Because they'll be back. And next time, we'll be ready for them." Agent Ryan Chase was no stranger to danger. Years of undercover work for a shadowed government agency had shaped him into a hardened operative with one unbreakable rule: complete the mission. Yet, Something about this assignment, deep in the belly of a covert research facility, gnawed at him. The intel was sparse, only hinting at an experimental weapon that had been stolen from another classified lab. But Ryan knew enough to recognize when he was being used, set up as a pawn in a game he couldn't see. The facility was a labyrinth of cold steel corridors and dim lighting. Ryan's steps echoed off the walls, swallowed by the distant hum of machines. Every corner held a whisper of danger. He could feel it, his instincts buzzing like a live wire. Then, a sharp crack split the silence, followed by a tremor that rattled the walls. An explosion erupted from a lab down the corridor, a bloom of light so bright it seemed to tear through the metal walls. Ryan threw himself back, arm shielding his face, but he was too close. The force of the blast slammed him against the wall, knocking the breath from his lungs. Stars danced across his vision as he struggled to his feet, his ears ringing. Smoke thickened in the air, carrying the scent of scorched metal and a strange, almost electric tang that made his skin tingle. As the dust settled, Ryan looked down at his hands and noticed the faintest shimmer surrounding them. A flicker of light danced between his fingers, weaving in and out of his skin like living electricity. He flexed his hand, and the light pulsed in response. Unnerved, he tried to shake it off, but it only grew stronger, wrapping around his fingers like a second skin. He didn't have time to process what had happened. The mission called for him to escape before the facility's automated defenses kicked in, but as he moved, his body felt different, lighter, faster. Every step was effortless, as if he were gliding rather than running. The corridors blurred around him, and when he finally burst into the cool night air, he felt a surge of energy within him, a power unlike anything he'd ever known. In the days that followed, Ryan grappled with the discovery that he could manipulate light. It wasn't just a trick of the eyes or an aftereffect of the explosion. No, this power was real. He could bend light to his will, create illusions, even fade into invisibility. The possibilities thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. For weeks, he tested his new abilities in secret, sneaking into abandoned warehouses and deserted alleyways, experimenting with what he could do. He learned to shape light into dazzling flashes, blinding any would-be attackers in an instant. He could cloak himself, blending into his surroundings so seamlessly that even a trained agent would struggle to spot him. And, in time, he discovered he could project holograms, illusions so real they could fool the sharpest minds. But as he honed his powers, Ryan began to see the world around him differently. The agency he'd served for years no longer felt like a sanctuary of justice, but rather a machine churning out agents, each more expendable than the last. The missions he'd once accepted without question began to feel tainted, and the lines between right and wrong grew increasingly blurred. One night, while watching the city from a rooftop, he realized he couldn't simply go back to being an agent. This power demanded something more from him. He could be a force of change, an avenger who operated outside the agency's constraints. He took on the codename Dawn and set out to use his abilities for justice on his own terms. Soon, tales of the mysterious figure swept through the city. Criminals whispered about a shadow that struck without warning, a being who could vanish in the blink of an eye and wield light like a weapon. The press latched onto the story, dubbing him the Vigilante Dawn. Ryan relished the anonymity, the freedom to act without the agency's restrictions, even as he knew it made him a target point. One night, during an intel-gathering operation, Ryan stumbled upon something far darker than petty crime. He'd been tracking a string of weapons deals when he intercepted a coded message about an organization known only as the Eclipse Network. Intrigued, he dug deeper, and what he found chilled him to the core. Eclipse was no ordinary criminal syndicate. It was a rogue faction with access to the same light manipulation technology he possessed. But unlike Ryan, they had twisted it, using it to sow terror and control. The leader of Eclipse was a man named Dr. Adrian Wolf, a former government scientist who disappeared years ago. Wolf's name was shrouded in infamy, a genius in light technology, rumored to have dabbled in morally questionable experiments. The files Ryan uncovered painted Wolf as a man obsessed with power, willing to use any means necessary to achieve his ends. Eclipse's plan was audacious and chilling. They aimed to stage a series of synchronized terrorist attacks in major cities across the globe. By manipulating light, they would create illusions so realistic that entire populations would be plunged into chaos, fearing invasions, natural disasters, and worse. Then, as governments scrambled to respond, Eclipse would strike, dismantling power structures and leaving the world ripe for their rule. Ryan felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. He couldn't ignore this, but neither could he simply hand the intel over to the agency. They'd betrayed him too many times, and he couldn't trust them not to weaponize his abilities if they learned of his secret. He knew he'd have to act alone, but the enormity of the task left him reeling. In his struggle, he reached out to the one person he believed he could trust, Agent Sarah Reed, his former partner. Sarah was sharp, resourceful, and, above all, had a moral compass that rarely wavered. He knew she suspected him of being the vigilante Dawn, but he'd kept her at arm's length, unsure if she'd understand his motives. Now, he had no choice but to bring her into the fold. Meeting Sarah in a secluded alley, he finally revealed his secret, showing her the light manipulation powers that had become his burden and his weapon. Her reaction was a mixture of awe and shock, tempered by a fierce determination. "Ryan," she whispered, eyes wide as he demonstrated a blinding flash that lit the alley like daylight. "Do you realize what you're capable of?" "I do," he replied, a hint of weariness in his voice. "And that's why I need your help. Eclipse is planning something catastrophic, and I can't take them down alone." Together, they formed a plan, recruiting a third ally, Lucas Grayson, a tech genius with a knack for hacking into any system and a network of underground contacts that could track Eclipse's activities. With Lucas's help, they pinpointed key Eclipse operatives and began dismantling the organization from the inside, launching a series of calculated strikes. Each mission brought new challenges, as Wolf countered their moves with a precision that suggested he was always one step ahead. One night, as they prepared to raid an Eclipse stronghold, Ryan encountered Wolf's enforcer, a figure known only as Spectre. Unlike Ryan, Spectre's light manipulation abilities were twisted and dark, enabling him to create deadly, razor-sharp projections of light that cut through steel and flesh alike. Their first encounter was a brutal clash of powers, light against shadow, each man pushing his abilities to the limit. Spectre fought with a ruthless efficiency, taunting Ryan with claims that he was just another government weapon, a pawn in a game he'd never understand. The words stung, echoing Ryan's own doubts, but he pushed through, determined to prove he was more than a tool. As the days passed, Eclipse's plan began to unfold. They unleashed their illusions in several cities, plunging them into chaos. Ryan and his team scrambled to intercept, barely managing to keep the attacks contained. It became clear that they were fighting a losing battle. Eclipse was too vast, too well coordinated. Desperation clawed at Ryan, and he found himself questioning his choice to operate outside the agency's support. But Sarah reminded him why he'd chosen this path, her steady gaze grounding him when his doubts threatened to consume him. "You're doing this because it's right, Ryan," she said. "Not because it's easy." Fueled by her words, Ryan devised a final plan. They would confront Wolf head-on, in a strike designed to dismantle Eclipse's core and sever the organization's power. It was a long shot, a risky gamble that could cost them their lives, but Ryan knew they had no other option. As the plan came together, Ryan could feel the tension building in every fiber of his body. He, Sarah, and Lucas had mapped out every detail, pinpointing the central hub of the Eclipse network, a fortified complex hidden in an abandoned industrial district on the city's edge. The team knew that Wolf would be there, and they understood that this confrontation would be different from anything they'd faced. They weren't just trying to stop another attack, they were going up against a man who wielded powers equal to Ryan's, a man with no scruples and an army at his command. They arrived under the cover of night, blending into the shadows that clung to the buildings. Ryan's light manipulation allowed him to cast a near-invisibility cloak over the team, moving them closer to their target without triggering any alarms. Lucas had hacked into the facility's surveillance system, blinding their cameras for a brief window, but they knew they'd only have moments before Eclipse realized something was amiss. The complex loomed ahead, its walls lined with armed guards, all equipped with advanced weaponry. Ryan scanned the scene, taking in every detail. "Lucas, keep us connected. I want a constant feed on those guard positions," he murmured into his comm. Lucas's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Got it. You've got a gap on the eastern side. Move now." Ryan led the team forward, slipping past the guards and into the facility's inner perimeter. They moved with precision, each of them playing their part flawlessly, as though they'd been trained together for years. Sarah was at his side, her steady presence grounding him, while Lucas navigated them through the building's labyrinthine corridors from his remote setup. As they approached the central command room, Ryan felt a chill settle over him. Something wasn't right. The air was thick, charged with an oppressive energy that seemed to pulse through the walls. He gestured for the others to stop, pressing a hand to his earpiece. "Lucas, are you picking up anything unusual on the sensors?" he whispered. A pause, then Lucas's voice, laced with tension. "I'm getting weird readings. High energy levels, but I can't pinpoint the source. Whatever it is, it's big." Ryan exchanged a glance with Sarah. They both knew what that meant. Wolf was nearby, and he wasn't alone. They pressed on, nerves taut, each step carrying them closer to the confrontation they'd been dreading. Finally, they reached the command room, its door standing ominously ajar. Ryan took a deep breath, steeling himself, and signaled for Sarah to cover him. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Wolf was waiting, a smug smile curving his lips. The room was bathed in an eerie, cold light that cast twisted shadows across the walls. Beside him stood Spectre, his face unreadable, his posture poised like a predator ready to strike. "Agent Chase," Wolf greeted, his tone dripping with mockery. "Or should I say, Dawn. Quite the upgrade, don't you think?" Ryan clenched his fists, the familiar hum of his power flickering to life beneath his skin. "It's over, Wolf. We're shutting this down, and you're coming with us." Wolf laughed, a low, chilling sound that echoed through the room. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, I didn't come all this way to be stopped by a government lapdog with a hero complex." His gaze shifted to Spectre, who nodded, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light. Before Ryan could react, Spectre lunged, his movements a blur as he closed the distance between them. Ryan barely had time to raise his hands, generating a shield of blinding light to deflect Spectre's first strike. The room exploded in a flurry of light and shadow, the two men locked in a deadly dance as their powers clashed. Spectre's abilities were unlike anything Ryan had encountered. Where Ryan's light was pure and radiant, Spectre's was dark, twisted, forged into razor-sharp projections that cut through the air like blades. Each strike forced Ryan to retreat, his defenses barely holding against the relentless assault. Sarah fired her weapon, aiming for Wolf, but the scientist moved with surprising agility, dodging her shots with ease. He gestured, and the lights in the room flickered, then dimmed, casting everything in a deep, unnatural darkness. Ryan's vision swam as he struggled to keep track of Spectre's movements, the shadows playing tricks on his eyes. "Is this all you've got, Chase?" Spectre taunted, his voice a whisper in the darkness. "I expected more from the infamous Dawn." Ryan gritted his teeth, pushing back the exhaustion that clawed at him. He knew he couldn't win this fight by playing defense. Taking a deep breath, he focused, gathering every ounce of energy he could muster. His skin glowed brighter, illuminating the room with a fierce, unyielding light that forced Spectre to shield his eyes. With a surge of adrenaline, Ryan struck, sending a blinding beam of light directly at Spectre. The man stumbled back, momentarily disoriented, and Ryan took the opportunity to close the distance, landing a solid punch to his jaw. Spectre fell, hitting the ground with a grunt, but even as he lay there, a smirk twisted his lips. "Impressive, Chase," he sneered, wiping a trickle of blood from his mouth. "But you'll have to do better than that." Spectre rose, his form seeming to dissolve into the shadows, only to reappear on the other side of the room. Ryan barely had time to react as Spectre launched another assault, his shadowy blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. Ryan dodged, but one of the blades grazed his arm, leaving a searing pain in its wake. Desperation clawed at him as he realized he was losing ground. He couldn't keep up with Spectre's relentless attacks, couldn't match the raw, twisted power that radiated from him. But as he struggled, a thought flickered through his mind, a memory of Lucas's words, of the high-energy readings they detected earlier. Wolf had to be drawing power from somewhere, feeding Spectre's abilities with an external source. If he could find it, disrupt it, he might have a chance. With a quick glance at Sarah, he signaled her to cover him. She nodded, her expression fierce, and opened fire, creating a distraction that allowed Ryan to slip past Spectre and dart toward the far end of the room, where a massive generator hummed with energy. The machinery pulsed, the faint glow of light emanating from its core, a sickly, unnatural shade that set his teeth on edge. Ryan reached out, his fingers brushing the generator's surface, and he felt a surge of energy pulse through him. It was like touching raw power, an electric current that burned through his veins, threatening to consume him. But he held on, focusing, drawing the light into himself and redirecting it, forcing it to bend to his will. A burst of energy exploded from the generator, engulfing the room in blinding light. Spectre screamed, the shadows around him dissolving as the light burned through them, stripping him of his power. Wolf stumbled back, shielding his eyes, his smug composure crumbling as he realized he was losing control. Ryan seized the moment, channeling the last of his strength into a final, blinding attack. He directed the light toward Wolf, enveloping him in a radiant glow that left no room for shadows, no space for escape. Wolf fell to his knees, his face twisted in fear and rage as the light consumed him, rendering him powerless. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan stood there, breathing heavily, the glow of his power dimming as exhaustion set in. Sarah moved to his side, her hand resting on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the battle they'd fought and won. Lucas's voice crackled over the comm. Is it over?" Ryan nodded, though he knew Lucas couldn't see him. "Yeah. It's over." As they made their way out of the facility, the weight of everything they'd endured settled over Ryan. He'd faced his darkest fears, confronted the shadows that had haunted him, and emerged victorious. But he knew this wasn't the end of his journey. In the days that followed, as he and Sarah dismantled the remnants of the Eclipse network, he realized that his path was clear. He couldn't go back to the agency, couldn't return to the life he'd once known. The power he wielded came with a responsibility, a duty to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and so, he became Dawn, a guardian who walked the line between light and shadow, fighting for justice in a world that desperately needed it. His past no longer defined him, he had chosen his own path, a path forged in the light of a new dawn. The ocean was calm, the water smooth like glass as it stretched beneath a painted sky. Kai moved his hand through the air, and a ribbon of water rose from the surface, twisting and swirling in response. He was one with it, feeling the currents, the depths, the strength of each pull and flow. It was his peace and his power, a rare combination that had carried him through every hardship he'd faced. But today, a storm brewed on the horizon, not in the sky, but in his mind. News had come of a new threat, someone who wielded powers that should have belonged to no one. Zarek, they called him, a man capable of controlling all the elements. Earth, air, fire, water, he held them all within his grasp, and he planned to use them to reshape the world. Kai let the water fall back into the sea. He couldn't face this alone, yet the thought of joining with others felt daunting. But when Elder Mora, the wise mentor of their village, had come to him, her words carried the weight of fate. "No single element can defeat him," she'd said, her voice grave yet filled with a glimmer of hope. "Only through unity can we stand a chance. Find them, Kai. Find the others." And so, he had set out, searching for the few like him, those who wielded the elements with power and skill. He traveled far, crossing mountains and deserts, forests and rivers, until he gathered 3 others who shared his rare gift. First, there was Lana, the fire wielder, a fierce and unpredictable force. Her power was raw, her temper hotter than her flames. She had met him with a blaze, testing him, challenging him before she finally agreed to join. She distrusted his calm nature, seeing it as a weakness. Then came Terra, the earth wielder. She was grounded and strong, a woman of few words but with a presence as unshakable as a mountain. She carried a quiet sadness, the weight of past battles fought and lost. She had hesitated before joining, wary of the fight ahead, but her loyalty to the world's balance won out. Finally, Arrow, the air wielder, completed their circle. He was light-hearted and carefree, using humor as a shield to hide his own fears. His power was tied to his emotions, and he often struggled to keep them in check, his control as fickle as a breeze. Yet, when he met Kai, he found something in his calmness that gave him courage. They gathered by the coast, where Kai called upon the waters to shield them from prying eyes. As they looked at each other, strangers bound by a shared purpose, it was clear that unity would not come easily. Lana folded her arms, her gaze sharp. "So, what's the plan, Kai? Or are we just going to stand here until Zarek turns us all to ash?" Kai met her gaze, refusing to let her fire consume him. "We need to train, to learn each other's strengths and weaknesses. Zarek has control of all elements. We have to work together to have any chance against him." Lana scoffed, a flicker of flame dancing in her palm. "I don't need training. I've faced worse than him." Terra's voice was steady, grounding the tension that had begun to crackle. "Perhaps. But this isn't about you alone, Lana. It's about all of us. Our powers aren't just weapons, they're parts of a whole. We need to understand that if we're to survive." Arrow grinned, but there was a hint of unease in his eyes. "Yeah, Lana, don't burn us all to a crisp just yet. I'd like to keep my hair intact." Kai allowed a small smile, though his mind was heavy with worry. He could feel the distrust and pride between them, the walls that would need to come down if they were to face Zarek together. But he didn't say anything. Instead, he raised his hand, calling forth a sphere of water that floated in the air before them. "We start here," he said. "With trust." One by one, they took turns displaying their abilities, testing each other's powers, learning how to blend and balance. At first, it was awkward, forced, as though each power rejected the others. Lana's fire flared too hot, nearly evaporating Kai's water. Terra's earth clashed with Eros' wind, scattering dust and stones. But over time, they began to find a rhythm, an unspoken language between their elements. Water cooled fire, fire hardened earth, earth steadied air. Each move became a dance, a cycle that fed and strengthened the whole, yet, even as they learned to work together, Kai felt the strain within himself. He was not as aggressive as Lana, not as unyielding as Terra, nor as agile as Aero. His power was subtle, a quiet force, and he feared it wasn't enough. Doubt began to creep in, whispering that he was a weak link, that he didn't belong among these powerful forces. The days passed in intense training, each session testing their endurance and resolve. Kai tried to keep his doubts hidden, but Lana's sharp gaze caught the smallest hints of his hesitation. "What's your deal, Kai?" she demanded one evening as they sat around a fire. The others were asleep, and the night was silent except for the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Kai shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." She poked at the fire, sending sparks into the air. "You're holding back. You think you're not strong enough." Kai looked at her, surprised by the insight. Lana's usual harshness was softened, her voice a rare blend of understanding and frustration. "Water isn't like fire," he murmured. "It's not explosive. It's quiet. And sometimes, it feels like that's a weakness." Lana's eyes softened, and for the first time, Kai saw beyond her fiery exterior. "Quiet doesn't mean weak, Kai. Water wears down mountains. It shapes continents. You have to believe in that power, or it'll never reach its full potential." He nodded, her words igniting a spark of confidence within him. But as the dawn approached, so did Zarek. Their training was cut short when they received news of Zarek's attack on a major city, his forces laying waste to buildings, his elemental powers sowing chaos in the streets. The team had no choice but to confront him, ready or not. As they approached the city, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and the echoes of crumbling stone. Zarek stood in the heart of it all, his hands raised, flames swirling around him, gusts of wind driving the fires higher. Kai's heart pounded as he met the villain's gaze. Zarek was a figure of raw power, his control over the elements effortless, terrifying. The team moved as one, each launching their own attack, a blend of water, fire, earth, and air, striking from all sides. But Zarek merely laughed, his powers combining to form a shield that deflected their every move. Lana charged forward, flames blazing around her fists. Terra sent a wave of rocks hurtling at him, while Aero whipped up a cyclone to trap him. But Zarek met them with a brutal force, his control shifting seamlessly from one element to another, each attack blending into a relentless assault. Kai tried to hold his ground, his water clashing with Zarek's fire, but the villain's power overwhelmed him. In an instant, he felt the heat sear through him, sending him sprawling to the ground, gasping for breath. He saw Lana fall beside him, her flames extinguished, and Aero crumpled under the weight of a stone that Zarek had hurled at him. Defeated, the team retreated, barely escaping with their lives. The city lay in ruins behind them, and the weight of failure settled heavily on Kai's shoulders. The others were battered and bruised, their morale shattered. As they limped away, Lana turned on him, fury blazing in her eyes. "This was your plan, Kai? To get us killed? We're not ready for this." Kai could feel his own anger rising, but it was laced with guilt. She was right, he hadn't been able to lead them to victory. He had underestimated Zarek's power and overestimated his own. Elder Mora appeared that night, her expression somber but resolute. She spoke to them softly, reminding them that their powers were not just tools, but parts of a greater whole. She told them stories of water carving stone, fire giving life, air carrying life, and earth providing strength. It was a lesson Kai took to heart, finding within it the core of his purpose. He realized that while his power might not be as explosive, it was resilient, adaptive, capable of withstanding and shaping the force around it, and so, Kai rose, determination hardening in his heart. He looked at his team, their eyes weary but holding a glimmer of hope. They would fight again, stronger, wiser, and united. Together, they would face Zarek, not as individuals, but as a force woven from the essence of the world itself. Kai's realization of his purpose brought a newfound sense of strength, a calm resolve that rippled through him like the steady pull of a tide. He knew now that his role wasn't to be the most aggressive force but the balance, the glue that could unify their power. With Elder Mora's guidance, the team resumed their training, but this time, there was a shift. They were no longer just wielding their elements in isolation, they were learning to move as one, their powers complementing each other rather than competing. Kai's connection with Lana deepened as he helped her see the power of control over raw force. She was fire incarnate, but under his calm direction, she found a way to temper her flames without losing their intensity. Arrow learned to let his emotions flow with the wind rather than resisting them, turning his fear into strength. And Terra, silent and steady, taught them all the importance of patience and precision, reminding them that power was most effective when it was deliberate. Their training became a dance, each element feeding into the other. Kai felt the doubts slipping away as he grew more attuned to the rhythm of their combined power. He was no longer a passive force but the calm center, directing each move with a quiet confidence that filled the others with trust. They were becoming a team, not just allies brought together by circumstance, but a unified whole with a single purpose. And then, the day of reckoning arrived. News reached them that Zarek had moved on to another city, this time threatening to devastate an entire region if his demands were not met. The team set out immediately, each step resonating with the shared understanding that this was their last chance. They couldn't afford to fail again. The journey to the city was silent, each member of the team focused, drawing strength from the earth, the air, the fire, and the water around them. Kai felt a deep calm settle over him, a confidence that extended beyond his own power. It was a feeling of unity, of purpose, that he had never known before. As they approached the city, the scene before them was one of pure destruction. Buildings lay in ruins, streets flooded with debris, and flames crackled from the remains of what had once been homes. Zarek stood at the heart of it all, his hands raised, a storm of elements swirling around him in a terrifying display of power. His eyes glowed with a fierce, unstoppable confidence, his presence a dark promise of absolute control, but Kai wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Without hesitation, he signaled to the others, and they spread out, forming a circle around Zarek. This time, there was no hesitance, no doubt. They moved as one, each element flowing seamlessly into the other as they launched their first attack. Kai sent a wave of water spiraling toward Zarek, a carefully controlled stream that circled him, trapping him within a barrier. At the same time, Lana's fire shot through the water, turning it to steam and shrouding Zarek in a blinding mist. Zarek snarled, his power shifting to dispel the steam, but Terra was ready, her hands pressed to the ground as she summoned a wall of rock that rose up around him, closing in on all sides. Arrow added his own touch, whipping up a wind that swirled the dust and debris into a whirlwind, cutting off Zarek's vision and disorienting him, but Zarek was no ordinary enemy. With a roar, he unleashed a blast of power that shattered Terra's walls and sent Eros wind scattering. He was powerful, unyielding, his mastery over the elements unmatched. But Kai could see the strain, the tiny cracks in Zarek's control. The more he used each element, the less focused he became, his attention divided between maintaining control and countering their attacks. Kai sensed his opening. Summoning every ounce of his power, he directed a surge of water at Zarek, dousing the flames that had sprung up around him. Lana followed with a concentrated blaze, heating the water to create another shroud of steam that obscured Zarek's vision. Terra used the cover to send a wave of rock and dirt toward him, catching him off guard and knocking him off balance. For a brief moment, Zarek faltered, his control slipping. Kai didn't hesitate. He called to the others, and together, they launched a combined attack, each element weaving into the other in a seamless harmony. The water cooled the earth, hardening it around Zarek's legs, trapping him. Fire and wind combined to create a vortex of heat that surrounded him, draining his energy, forcing him to split his focus. Zarek fought back with everything he had, but Kai could see the desperation in his eyes, the cracks widening in his power. They had found his weakness. He was spread too thin, trying to maintain control over all elements without truly understanding any of them. Kai knew then that Zarek's power was not a strength but a flaw, a fractured force that lacked the unity their own team had forged. With a final surge of energy, Kai unleashed a torrent of water that crashed down on Zarek, extinguishing his flames and driving him to his knees. Terra reinforced the ground beneath him, locking him in place, while Eros wind swirled around him, cutting off any escape. Lana stepped forward, her flames crackling with controlled fury as she raised her hands, ready to deliver the final blow, but Kai held up a hand, stopping her. "He's beaten," he said, his voice steady. "We don't need to destroy him. His power is fractured. He's no threat anymore." Zarek looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and despair. For the first time, Kai saw the man behind the power, a man who had been consumed by his ambition, who had sought control but lost himself in the process. It was a fate Kai had almost succumbed to, a path he now knew he would never take. Together, they bound Zarek, stripping him of his power and sealing it within the earth, water, fire, and air, each element taking a piece of it, dispersing it into the world where it could no longer be used for harm. Zarek was taken into custody, his once terrifying presence now reduced to a shadow of its former self. As they stood amidst the ruins of the city, a sense of quiet triumph settled over them. They had won, not just against Zarek, but against their own doubts and fears. They had forged a bond that went beyond their powers, a unity that gave each of them strength beyond measure. Kai looked at his team, his friends, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had found his place, his purpose, not as the strongest or the fiercest, but as the calm center that held them together. He knew now that water's true strength lay not in its force, but in its adaptability, its quiet resilience. The city would rebuild, life would go on, and they would continue to protect the balance they had fought so hard to preserve. As they parted ways, each returning to their own lives, Kai knew that they would always be connected, their powers woven together in a tapestry of trust and unity, and if the world ever needed them again, they would be ready. In a world where genetic modification had transcended from science fiction into everyday reality, Lucas Stone had once been an idealist, a believer in the power of technology to better humanity. He'd been among the first in the wave of enhanced, choosing to make minor adjustments to his genome, a tweak here, a nudge there, just enough to sharpen his reflexes, quicken his mind, and enhance his endurance. He was no Superman, but he'd felt the subtle power in his veins, a satisfaction that he was equipped to make a difference. But the world around him had shifted. What had once been seen as a miraculous advancement was now synonymous with division. The enhanced walked taller, faster, and more confidently, leaving the ordinary, the unmodified, to trail in their shadow. Lucas, still loyal to his ethics, had chosen to use his skills to protect those without genetic advantages. Now, he worked as an investigator, tracking rogue enhanced who abused their powers, enforcing a delicate balance between ordinary citizens and the genetically modified. Lucas's latest assignment brought him into the shadowy part of the city, where neon lights flickered above narrow streets crowded with alleys and crumbling brick buildings. The enhanced had pushed their way into all walks of life, some of them taking jobs that required a certain level of ability, positions as rescue workers, athletes, and even high-level consultants. But others had used their genetic upgrades for far more dangerous purposes. That night, Lucas was hunting one of the latter. A report had come in that a group of enhanced had taken over a block, terrorizing anyone who dared cross them. Lucas strode through the murky streets, senses sharpened, picking up the faintest traces of movement and sound, an ability that had saved him more than once. At the heart of the district, he encountered the perpetrators, 3 enhanced individuals huddled in a tight circle, the edges of their bodies flickering with unnatural energy. The leader, a hulking figure with arms like iron rods, spotted Lucas and smirked. Well, what's this? A lone wolf, the leader sneered, flexing his genetically modified muscles. Think you can take us on? Lucas held his ground, assessing their strength. Enhanced abilities varied widely, often unpredictable. He took a breath, centering himself, and then sprang into action, his body a precise, honed instrument of force. Within moments, he'd subdued the leader, his strength calibrated perfectly to hold him without causing permanent damage. But as he tightened his grip, he sensed something unusual. The man's power didn't seem random or chaotic, as most genetic modifications were. Instead, there was a refined quality to it, as though his abilities had been sculpted, crafted with intention. As the police arrived to secure the scene, Lucas began piecing together what he'd noticed. This wasn't just a rogue gang causing trouble, there was something deeper, a chilling purpose behind these enhancements. And that night, as he lay awake, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring at the tip of an iceberg. In the days that followed, Lucas dived into his investigation. He started digging through records, tracking connections, and following leads. His suspicions led him to an abandoned research facility, an old shell of a place, with yellowing documents and broken test tubes littering the dusty floors. But in the piles of papers, he found something, a logo, a small triangle entwined with a DNA strand, emblazoned on a crumbling page. Beneath it, a single word, Genesis. Genesis was more than a company or a project, it was a name whispered among those who dared question the origins of the enhanced. Rumor had it that Genesis was not merely providing genetic upgrades but that they harbored ambitions to shape the future of humanity. The more Lucas uncovered, the clearer it became, Genesis wasn't just altering genes. They were steering the very direction of human evolution. A few days later, Lucas's investigation took a new turn. He received a message from an anonymous source, with a location and a single line, "Meet me if you want to know the truth." Despite the risks, Lucas followed the lead, arriving at a dimly lit, underground bar. His contact, a woman cloaked in shadows, introduced herself as Jenna Morris, a former scientist who had worked within Genesis. Jenna's voice was shaky, her eyes haunted. She explained the scope of Genesis's ambition. The organization had been carefully crafting genetic modifications, not as a mere enhancement but as a tool for control. They were developing new genomes, meticulously selecting traits and abilities, creating a population that could be loyal to Genesis alone. For years, they'd been implanting subtle upgrades, designing enhanced individuals to be stronger, faster, and most of all, obedient. But why? Lucas demanded, his voice low, his heart pounding. What's the endgame here? Jenna swallowed, her hands clenching around her drink. Genesis wants to build a hierarchy, Lucas. They see humanity as flawed, chaotic, uncontrolled. They think they can save us by creating a new kind of human, one that fits their design. They want to lead us into a future where free will is secondary to survival. Lucas felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he kept it in check. What about those of us who already have enhancements? He asked, his voice tense. Are we just pawns in their game? Jenna nodded solemnly. Some of you were chosen for specific traits. Others, you're collateral. Their experiments went out of control sometimes, and they lost track of which individuals carried which modifications. But there are enhanced individuals out there, like you, Lucas, who still retain their free will. And that's what Genesis fears most. Jenna handed Lucas a small drive, filled with files and documents detailing Genesis's plans and methods. It was enough evidence to expose their conspiracy, but it was also a window into the true horror of their ambitions. The files contained detailed profiles of enhanced individuals, each with notes on how to activate dormant abilities through a device called the Genome Controller, a piece of technology Genesis had developed to awaken genetic codes at their command. Lucas left the meeting, his mind reeling. He knew what he had to do. Genesis couldn't be allowed to move forward with their plans. Armed with the information Jenna had given him, he began recruiting other enhanced individuals who shared his ethical concerns. Among them were people who'd once been law-abiding citizens, those who'd taken only minor enhancements, and those with high-level modifications who had turned their backs on Genesis. Together, they devised a plan to break into a Genesis facility, targeting the lab that housed the Genome Controller. Lucas understood the stakes. If Genesis unleashed the device, they could manipulate the minds of enhanced individuals globally, enforcing obedience with the push of a button. The implications were terrifying: a world where free will was a memory, where every enhanced person served as a puppet in Genesis's hands. As they prepared for the assault, Lucas took stock of his small, ragtag team. There was Ryan, a combat-trained enhanced with heightened reflexes and incredible agility; Tessa, a hacker with genetic modifications that improved her cognitive abilities, allowing her to interface with complex systems nearly instinctively; and Mark, a former soldier whose strength was almost superhuman. Each had their reasons for opposing Genesis, each had their scars, their burdens, and their thirst for justice. The night they set out was dark, moonless, casting the city in deep shadows. They moved swiftly, their training and abilities in sync. When they arrived at the Genesis facility, Lucas felt a knot of apprehension settle in his stomach. This was more than just a mission, it was a battle for the soul of humanity. Genesis represented the ultimate perversion of genetic advancement, and they were the only ones standing in the way. They slipped inside, Tessa hacking through security protocols with practiced ease. Lucas could feel the weight of Jenna's warning pressing on him. Genesis had developed enhanced enforcers, genetically modified soldiers who would be relentless, nearly invincible. As they pushed deeper into the facility, they encountered their first obstacle: a group of enhanced guards. The guards were unlike any Lucas had faced before. Their movements were mechanical, precise, lacking the instinctual, erratic reactions that made humans unpredictable. These guards weren't just enhanced, they were controlled. Lucas's team engaged, a rapid and brutal confrontation that left them shaken but victorious. Yet, every step they took felt like wading into a darker, more twisted reality. The guards were merely the first line of defense, and Lucas could sense the presence of something more sinister lying ahead. Finally, they reached the lab where the genome controller was housed. The device sat in the center of the room, a sleek piece of machinery humming with quiet menace. Lucas could almost feel the waves of power radiating from it, a device capable of altering minds, bending wills. But as he stepped forward to dismantle it, an alarm blared, and the door slid open, revealing the figure he'd hoped to avoid, Dr. Evelyn Crane, the mastermind behind Genesis, standing with an air of cold authority. Her gaze was calculating, a twisted pride gleaming in her eyes as she observed Lucas and his team. "Did you really think you could stop us?" she sneered, her voice icy. "This is evolution, Lucas. This is the future." Lucas met her gaze, defiance sparking in his own. "Not if that future means sacrificing everything that makes us human." Lucas held his ground, eyes locked on Dr. Evelyn Crane. The hum of the genome controller pulsed in the room, a heartbeat of raw power, ready to enslave thousands of enhanced if it fell into the wrong hands, or, rather, if it remained in hers. "Evolution isn't forced," he said, his voice steady. "It's natural, unpredictable. That's what makes humanity worth fighting for." Crane's lips twisted into a smile, but there was no warmth in it, only cold ambition. "Unpredictability is exactly the problem," she replied, crossing her arms. "For too long, humanity has staggered forward, driven by impulse and weakness. The genome controller is our chance to remove chaos from the equation. Imagine a world where everyone fulfills their potential, guided by a purpose that transcends selfish desires." As she spoke, enhanced enforcers flooded into the room, forming a protective barrier around her. They stood with military precision, their eyes glazed with a mindless obedience that sent a chill down Lucas's spine. These weren't merely soldiers, they were products, extensions of Crane's ambition. Tessa, her fingers twitching, shifted closer to Lucas. "What now?" she whispered, her gaze darting to the enforcers, each one standing like a human wall of raw, controlled power. Lucas tightened his grip on his weapon, a custom-modified tranquilizer gun designed to subdue enhanced without fatal injuries. "We stick to the plan," he murmured back, his voice barely audible. With a swift hand signal, Lucas directed his team to spread out, positioning themselves for an attack. The enforcers were highly trained, genetically optimized for combat, but Lucas's team had one advantage: freedom. Where the enforcers moved with mechanical precision, his team operated with a fluid unpredictability born from personal choice, an instinct Genesis couldn't program out of them. Dr. Crane seemed to sense the impending clash and raised a hand. "Lucas, think carefully before you act. You're talented, strong, and you care about people. Genesis could offer you a place in this new order, a chance to shape humanity's future with us. Join us, and you'll have a purpose greater than yourself." Her words lingered, tempting in their promise of power and control. Lucas took a deep breath, his mind racing through everything he'd seen, the lives he'd touched, the horrors he'd uncovered. No amount of power was worth the loss of human agency, of the right to choose one's own path. "Sorry, Dr. Crane," he said, his voice ringing with finality. "But a future without freedom isn't one I'll fight for." Without waiting for her reaction, Lucas launched himself forward, catching the enforcers off guard. His team followed suit, fanning out as they engaged in a brutal, close-quarters fight. The room exploded into a chaotic flurry of movement, fists and feet flying, as Lucas's team fought with every ounce of strength they had. Lucas ducked beneath a punch, sweeping the legs out from an enforcer and sending him crashing to the floor. Another charged at him, but Tessa was there, her cybernetic reflexes firing as she slammed an elbow into the enforcer's side, temporarily disabling his enhancements. Mark moved like a whirlwind, his superhuman strength allowing him to take on 2 enforcers at once, his fists hammering down like a sledgehammer, yet, for every enforcer they took down, another seemed to take its place. The enforcers moved with relentless efficiency, bound by the genome controller's influence, their minds trapped in Crane's iron grip. Lucas's muscles screamed with exertion as he fought on, his vision blurring, but he couldn't afford to falter. Through the melee, he caught a glimpse of Dr. Crane standing by the genome controller, her expression one of calculated indifference. She watched the fight unfold like a scientist observing an experiment, her fingers poised over a control panel. Lucas's heart raced as he realized what she was about to do. Fall back, he shouted to his team, his voice barely audible over the clamor. Get clear of the controller. But his warning came too late. Crane pressed a button, and the genome controller emitted a low, resonant hum. Lucas felt a strange pressure building in his head, as though a weight were pressing down on his mind. For a moment, his movements felt sluggish, as though something were pulling him back, urging him to yield. But he gritted his teeth, fighting against the invisible force, focusing every fiber of his being on resisting the pull. This was Genesis's ultimate weapon, an override command that could suppress the will of any enhanced individual within range. But Lucas's enhancements had always been mild, the modifications less intrusive, and he clung to that fragment of freedom like a lifeline. Through sheer force of will, he broke free, shaking off the controller's influence. He looked around, his heart sinking as he saw some of his teammates faltering, their eyes dulling as they succumbed to the controller's control. Lucas, Tessa's voice was strained, her body trembling as she fought to resist. You have to stop her. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay focused. Hold on, Tessa. I'll end this. Ignoring the enforcers, Lucas charged straight toward Dr. Crane, adrenaline surging through him as he closed the distance. Crane's eyes widened in surprise as he barreled toward her, a force of raw determination. At the last second, she sidestepped, her hand reaching for a stun weapon, but Lucas was faster. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it sharply, forcing her to drop the device. She let out a gasp of pain, but her eyes blazed with defiance. You're a fool, Lucas, she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. Without us, humanity is doomed to destroy itself. You think you're protecting them, but you're only delaying the inevitable. Lucas held her gaze, his jaw set. I'd rather give them a chance to choose their own fate than force them into yours. In one swift motion, he turned her around, using her as a human shield as he reached for the control panel. His fingers flew across the controls, his years of training guiding him as he searched for the controller's shutdown sequence, but Crane was a step ahead. She twisted in his grip, slamming her elbow into his side, forcing him to stumble. She broke free, her eyes blazing with fury. If I can't have this world, neither will you. She lunged toward the control panel, her hand reaching for a lever that would activate the controller at full power, a final, desperate attempt to seize control of every enhanced in the city. But Lucas reacted instinctively, diving forward and grabbing her arm, pulling her back with all his strength. They grappled in a deadly struggle, each vying for control of the lever. The genome controller's hum grew louder, vibrating with a dangerous energy that threatened to spiral out of control. Lucas felt his strength waning, his body battered and bruised, but he couldn't let Crane win. With a final surge of determination, he wrenched the lever away from her grasp, twisting it downward, disengaging the controller. The machine's hum faded, the oppressive pressure lifting from his mind. Dr. Crane staggered back, her face pale with shock. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. You don't understand what you've done. Humanity will spiral into chaos without us." Lucas took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "Humanity deserves the right to make its own mistakes." Crane opened her mouth to reply, but the words died on her lips. The door burst open, and a team of law enforcement officers stormed in, alerted by the commotion and ready to take down anyone left standing. Lucas's team, weakened but free from the controller's influence, stood in silence, watching as Crane was taken into custody, her ambitions shattered. As the officers secured the room, Lucas exchanged weary glances with his team. They had won, but the cost was evident in the bruises and exhaustion etched into their faces. The genome controller lay dormant, its power neutralized, but the threat it represented lingered in Lucas's mind. He knew that Genesis wouldn't be the last organization to try to manipulate humanity's future. But for now, he'd struck a blow for freedom, a stand against those who sought to control what it meant to be human. In the quiet aftermath, Tessa approached him, her expression solemn. "Do you think they'll try again?" Lucas nodded, his eyes distant. "Probably. But as long as there are people willing to fight, there's hope. We may be enhanced, but that doesn't mean we're any less human." Together, they left the Genesis facility, stepping into the crisp night air, the weight of their actions settling on their shoulders. The world beyond was uncertain, unpredictable, but for Lucas, that was exactly what made it worth fighting for. In the quiet town of Blue Creek, where the nights were filled with the hum of crickets and the occasional howl of coyotes, Ethan Monroe found himself staring up at the stars from his rooftop. His life had been a series of controlled storms. As a firefighter, he was trained to face the fiercest blazes, his fireproof suit often the only thing standing between him and death. Tonight, though, there was a chill in the air that even his battle-hardened skin felt, a whisper from the cosmos he couldn't quite shake. It wasn't just the stars that looked strange, they felt closer, as if the universe itself was leaning in to whisper something just for him. Miles away, in bustling New York, Maya Patel paced her studio, canvases and sketches cluttering every surface. She was an artist, a visionary who could bring light to life with the stroke of a brush. Her paintings glowed, quite literally, an anomaly she'd never fully understood but knew she could control. She could make her art shimmer and dance, reflections bouncing off her canvases in patterns that left viewers entranced. Yet tonight, her paints and colors felt dull. Something deep within her pulsed, a warning, an invitation. Elsewhere, above the clouds in a military jet, Leon Castillo flew a routine mission. The sky was his domain, where he felt most alive. Pulling G's like gravity was merely an inconvenience. His reflexes were sharper than most, his reactions faster, a gift he'd been born with, honed through years of training. But tonight, his cockpit lights flickered, a soft humming filling the air. It was as if the stars themselves were calling to him, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. And then it happened. All three saw it, a streak of light, brighter than any star, cutting through the sky and growing until it filled their vision. Each of them felt it as the light enveloped them, a sensation of weightlessness, of being drawn from their worlds into something much larger than themselves. Their senses tingled with the strange yet familiar embrace of ancient power. When they opened their eyes, they found themselves on a platform bathed in an ethereal glow, surrounded by beings of otherworldly beauty and strength. Before them stood the Interstellar Council, a coalition of leaders from across the galaxy, some humanoid, others entirely alien, but all emanating an unmistakable sense of authority and wisdom. A towering figure with silver skin and a crown of stars stepped forward. His voice was deep, resonant, echoing across the vast chamber. "Earth's protectors," he began, his gaze sweeping across them, "you have been chosen. The galaxy is on the brink of war, and ancient powers have awakened, forces that threaten the peace we have fought to uphold for millennia. You will be trained to wield these powers, to become the guardians of the stars." Ethan, Maya, and Leon exchanged bewildered glances, the enormity of the moment pressing down on them. They were heroes on Earth, but this was beyond anything they had ever imagined. "Wait a minute," Leon said, his voice tense with skepticism. "What exactly are we up against? And why us?" A member of the council, a feline-like creature with eyes that shimmered like galaxies, spoke in a low, calming voice. "An ancient force, older than any of us, has awakened. It lies in the hands of a warlord known as Malakar, a tyrant bent on conquering not just Earth, but every civilization within reach. He commands dark cosmic forces, and his powers are unparalleled. But with the celestial forces that each of you will learn to harness, you may stand a chance." A murmur swept through the group of humans. The weight of their new responsibility settled over them like an unbreakable chain, each link forged with the gravity of their task. The council guided them to a vast, open training field, set beneath a dome where galaxies spiraled and stars flickered in real time. They were introduced to their mentors, alien warriors, each uniquely skilled in wielding powers that drew from the very essence of the cosmos. The mentors demonstrated abilities that left the humans awestruck, manipulating energy, bending light, even summoning meteor showers in controlled bursts. Ethan's mentor was Zyr, a being from the planet Salvantis, whose people were renowned for their mastery of heat and energy. Zyr was humanoid, but his skin shimmered like molten metal, his veins glowing with the fire of 1,000 suns. As Ethan watched, Zyr summoned a sphere of blazing energy, the heat so intense that it caused the air around it to shimmer. With a flick of his wrist, Zyr sent the sphere soaring across the training field, where it dissipated in a flash of light. Ethan took a deep breath, focusing on the energy within him. Slowly, he felt a warmth spreading through his body, a fire that pulsed in his veins. He extended his hand, and to his astonishment, a small flame flickered to life in his palm. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maya's mentor, Lyra, was a being of pure light, her form shifting and shimmering like a prism. Her people, the Lumari, had evolved to exist as energy, manipulating light in ways that defied human understanding. Lyra demonstrated her powers by creating intricate patterns of light in the air, each one resonating with a soft hum. She taught Maya to focus, to channel her energy into specific wavelengths, allowing her to bend light and create illusions. Leon's mentor was Crix, a massive, stone-skinned warrior from the gravity-dense world of Tracher. His people were masters of gravitational manipulation, using their unique physiology to control their density and even create localized gravitational fields. Crix showed Leon how to anchor himself to the ground, his body becoming as immovable as a mountain. With practice, Leon learned to manipulate his own weight, allowing him to move with impossible speed or become a fortress of strength. Days turned into weeks as the Earth heroes trained under the guidance of their mentors. They faced countless challenges, pushing their minds and bodies to their limits. Yet, as they honed their powers, they grew closer, not only to their mentors but also to each other. They learned to trust in their newfound abilities, to rely on one another in ways they had never imagined. But their training was not without its struggles. Ethan grappled with the destructive nature of his power, fearing that he could lose control and harm those he cared about. Maya struggled to maintain her illusions over long periods, her energy often waning at critical moments. Leon wrestled with the responsibility that came with his newfound strength, knowing that he could end lives with a single misstep. One night, as the three of them sat beneath the stars, the weight of their task pressing down on them, Ethan spoke up, "Do you guys ever wonder why we were chosen? Out of all the people on Earth, why us? Maya looked at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Maybe it's because we've all faced challenges on Earth that prepared us for this. We've all had to be strong, to protect others, even when it meant risking ourselves. Leon grunted, crossing his arms. Or maybe we're just the unlucky ones who happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. They laughed, the sound echoing across the training grounds, a rare moment of levity in the face of their daunting mission. Their laughter was cut short, however, as alarms blared through the training field. Red lights flashed, and the Council's voice echoed in their minds, "Guardians, prepare for battle. Malakar's forces have breached our defenses. This is not a drill." Heart pounding, Ethan looked at Maya and Leon, a spark of determination in his eyes. This was it, their first real test. They had trained for this moment, but the reality of facing an enemy like Malakar was something they could never truly be prepared for. They rushed to the armory, donning the armor and weapons that had been crafted for them by their mentors. Ethan's suit glowed with an inner fire, channeling his heat and energy. Maya's was sleek and reflective, amplifying her light-based powers. Leon's was heavy and imposing, designed to withstand immense force. As they stepped out onto the battlefield, they were greeted by the sight of Malakar's soldiers, a legion of dark, twisted beings, each one emanating an aura of pure malevolence. The soldiers moved as one, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light, their bodies surrounded by a dark mist that seemed to absorb the light around them. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the fire within him surge in response to the threat. Maya focused, her hands glowing as she prepared to create illusions to confuse their enemies. Leon clenched his fists, his body becoming as solid as stone as he prepared to stand his ground. The battle was fierce, a clash of light and darkness that shook the ground beneath them. Ethan unleashed torrents of fire, incinerating the soldiers that dared to approach him. Maya created dazzling illusions, causing the enemy to strike at shadows and phantoms. Leon barreled through the ranks, his fists like sledgehammers, his strength unstoppable, but for every enemy they felled, more seemed to take their place. The forces of Malakar were relentless, their dark energy sapping the strength of the Guardians, pushing them to their limits. Ethan's flames began to waver, Maya's illusions flickered, and Leon's strength began to falter. Just when it seemed they would be overwhelmed, a blinding light erupted from the sky, and the Council a blinding light erupted from the sky, illuminating the battlefield like a second sun. The Council had arrived, and with them, a legion of allies from across the galaxy, heroes and warriors of various shapes, sizes, and abilities. They moved as one, a tidal wave of determination and raw power, driving back Malakar's forces with a force that the Guardians could barely comprehend. Ethan, Maya, and Leon, drained and battered, felt a surge of renewed strength. This was what they had been fighting for, a united galaxy, a coalition of beings who, despite their differences, had come together to protect the peace they all valued. With a silent nod of understanding, the three Earth heroes rose to join their allies, throwing themselves into the fray with a newfound sense of purpose. Ethan focused on channeling his fire into controlled blasts, targeting clusters of Malakar's soldiers and clearing paths for his allies. He felt his flames burn hotter and brighter than ever before, fed by the strength of those fighting beside him. Maya, drawing from the ambient light around her, created dazzling illusions that shielded their movements, allowing the allied forces to flank the enemy. Her powers, once limited to her paintings, now felt boundless, as if the very stars themselves were lending her their light. Leon, meanwhile, used his control over gravity to protect his comrades, creating barriers that shielded them from enemy attacks and anchoring himself to the ground with an unshakable determination. He was a fortress on the battlefield, an immovable object that the forces of darkness could not break. As the tide of the battle began to turn, a shadow fell over the battlefield, blocking out the light of the stars. Malachar had arrived, his towering form shrouded in darkness, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light that chilled even the bravest of warriors. The warlord radiated an aura of absolute power, his very presence seeming to drain the life from the air around him. With a wave of his hand, he unleashed a torrent of dark energy that sent the allied forces sprawling, their strength faltering in the face of his overwhelming might. Ethan, Maya, and Leon felt the weight of his power bearing down on them, threatening to crush them. But they held their ground, refusing to back down. This was what they had trained for, what they had prepared themselves to face. They would not let Malachar's darkness snuff out the light they had fought so hard to protect. Ethan summoned every ounce of strength he had left, his flames blazing brighter than ever before. He focused on Malachar, channeling his energy into a concentrated beam of fire aimed directly at the warlord. The flames struck Malachar with a blinding flash, but the warlord barely flinched, his dark aura absorbing the attack as if it were nothing more than a flicker of candlelight. Maya, undeterred, used her light manipulation to create a blinding flash, hoping to disorient him. The battlefield was illuminated with a light so intense that even Malachar's dark energy seemed to waver. But when the light faded, Malachar stood unharmed, a mocking grin spreading across his face as he raised his hand, preparing to strike them down. Leon, sensing the imminent danger, acted without hesitation. He launched himself at Malachar, using his control over gravity to increase his weight and momentum, becoming an unstoppable force aimed directly at the warlord. He collided with Malachar, driving him back a few steps, but it was clear that even Leon's immense strength was no match for the warlord's power. Malachar laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed across the battlefield. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "I am eternal. I am darkness incarnate. You are nothing but insects before me." The Guardians, battered and exhausted, knew they couldn't match Malachar's power alone. But they didn't need to. This wasn't just their fight, it was the fight of every being on that battlefield, of every star and world that Malachar sought to conquer. The Council, seeing the Guardians' resolve, began to channel their own powers, amplifying the abilities of the Earth heroes. The alien allies joined in, lending their strength to the effort, creating a surge of energy that coursed through Ethan, Maya, and Leon like a supernova. They felt their powers magnified beyond anything they had ever experienced, their bodies humming with the energy of the cosmos itself. Ethan's flames transformed, becoming a blinding white inferno that seared through the darkness. Maya's light manipulation evolved, allowing her to harness pure starlight, creating beams of energy that sliced through Malachar's defenses. Leon's control over gravity intensified, giving him the ability to bend the very fabric of space around him, making him untouchable. Together, they unleashed their powers in a coordinated assault, their attacks merging into a single, unstoppable force aimed directly at Malachar. The warlord staggered, his dark aura cracking under the relentless assault. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes as he realized that he was no longer invincible, but Malachar was not one to be defeated easily. With a roar of fury, he unleashed a wave of dark energy, a last-ditch effort to crush the Guardians and their allies. The force of the blast was immense, threatening to consume them all, to snuff out the light they had fought so hard to protect. In that moment, Ethan, Maya, and Leon knew what they had to do. They focused their powers, channeling every ounce of energy they had left into a final, desperate attack. They poured their very souls into the effort, creating a shield of light and fire and gravity that pushed back against Malachar's darkness, holding it at bay. And then, with a surge of unity and purpose, the allied forces joined in, lending their own powers to the shield. The energy of 1,000 worlds, of countless beings united in a common cause, converged into a single point of light that grew brighter and brighter until it was blinding. The darkness shattered. Malakar's roar of fury turned into a scream of agony as the light consumed him, burning away his dark energy, reducing him to nothing more than a fading shadow. With a final, defiant snarl, he vanished, his essence scattered to the far reaches of the galaxy. His reign of terror finally ended. Silence fell over the battlefield as the light faded, the dust settling over the shattered remnants of Malakar's army. The Guardians, exhausted and battered, looked around at their allies, at the beings who had fought beside them, who had believed in them. The Interstellar Council stepped forward, their eyes filled with pride and gratitude. "You have done what we could not," the silver-skinned leader said, his voice filled with reverence. "You have proven that even the greatest darkness cannot withstand the light of unity. You are the guardians of the stars, and your courage has saved us all." Ethan, Maya, and Leon exchanged weary smiles, the weight of their accomplishment settling over them like a warm blanket. They had faced an enemy beyond their wildest nightmares, had stood together in the face of impossible odds, and had emerged victorious. They had become more than heroes, they had become legends. The Council and their allies led the Guardians back to the galactic center, where they were honored in a ceremony that would be remembered across the stars. Their names would be spoken with awe and respect, their deeds celebrated by countless worlds. As they prepared to return to Earth, the Council members approached them, their expressions filled with warmth. "You are always welcome here," the leader said. "Though you may return to your world, you will forever be a part of ours. The galaxy owes you a debt that can never be repaid." Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for everything." Maya took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the stars. "I'll never look at the night sky the same way again." Leon grinned, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "Guess we'll have some stories to tell back home." And with that, they returned to Earth, forever changed by their journey, by the powers they had learned to wield, by the bonds they had forged with beings from across the galaxy. They knew that their lives would never be the same, that they would carry the memories of their adventure with them always. They were no longer just protectors of their world. They were the guardians of the stars. Max Kane's first memory of traveling through time was surreal. One moment, he was clutching the alien device he discovered in a restricted section of the government research lab, its metallic surface cold and humming with potential, and the next, he found himself on a deserted street under a crimson sky. Everything was unnaturally silent, save for the faint hum of the device. He looked around, disoriented, feeling as if he were a puzzle piece dropped into the wrong box. It had been a glitch in the device, a prototype, something alien scientists had clearly designed for purposes far beyond human comprehension. But for Max, the accidental discovery of this strange ability was a game-changer. He had spent years studying the fabric of time, immersing himself in theories of wormholes and cosmic singularities, but here he was, holding a key to the universe. The device let him slip between moments in history, visit places untouched by humanity, and witness events that had long since faded into the annals of myth and legend. His first year with the device had been an exploration, a careful navigation of time's currents. He'd learned to walk quietly through history, to observe without leaving a trace. It wasn't just about protecting the future, he knew that even the smallest misstep could send ripples across time. He held an almost sacred respect for this power, using it sparingly, his mind constantly on edge for any signs of paradox. But everything changed when he first felt the fracture. It was subtle at first, like the buzz of static or the faint scent of something burning. He was in a quiet forest in northern Europe, watching a Viking ritual when the sensation hit him. It wasn't a sound, nor a smell, more of a shift in the air, a visceral awareness that something fundamental had splintered within time's flow. Max had been standing at the edge of a river when he saw it, a crack in the sky, like a spiderweb slowly stretching outward. Time, as he knew it, was fracturing, and it was happening because of him. Later, as he traveled back to his own time to investigate, he found the source, Etheron, a villain with ambitions as vast as his own powers. Etheron wasn't just any ordinary antagonist, he was a master manipulator who had managed to combine ancient alien technology with his own brand of twisted genius. His goal was straightforward: to rewrite the history of every reality, every version of Earth, and shape it into his perfect vision. Each timeline, every branching reality, would bow to his control. For Max, the challenge wasn't just a matter of stopping Etheron. It was about preserving the very concept of reality itself, safeguarding the diversity of each universe's history, its unique trajectory. He couldn't bear to think of a universe where all the lives, choices, and freedoms were flattened under one man's rule. And so, with a deep breath, he set the device to track Etheron's signal across timelines, knowing this would be the most dangerous journey he had ever undertaken. The first world he visited was a strange, steampunk-inspired reality. The streets were cobbled, and the air was thick with the scent of oil and iron. People moved about in brass-plated exoskeletons, clanking and hissing as they carried out their daily routines. Max had barely adjusted to this new world's atmosphere when he was accosted by a group of guards in extravagant clockwork armor, their eyes hidden behind mechanical visors. "Identify yourself, traveler," one of them demanded, his voice harsh and metallic. Max raised his hands slowly. "I'm here looking for Lady Ironclad. I'm told she's someone who appreciates uninvited guests." The guards exchanged glances before nodding, and within minutes, he was led into the heart of the city, where a massive clock tower loomed over the landscape like a metal sentinel. Lady Ironclad was waiting in her workshop, her fingers busy with a screwdriver as she tinkered with a half-assembled automaton. She was tall and imposing, her frame encased in a suit of brass that gleamed in the dim light. "You're the time traveler, aren't you?" she asked, without looking up. Max nodded. "And you're the one who fights against tyranny in this world. I need your help." Together, they pieced together a plan. Lady Ironclad's knowledge of this world's mechanics was invaluable, and her resourcefulness and quick thinking made her an ideal ally. Max explained Etheron's plans, how he intended to use his powers to dominate every timeline, and Lady Ironclad's face grew grim. "If what you say is true," she murmured, "then it's not just my world that's at stake, it's every world." Their alliance was short-lived but impactful. Together, they managed to confront Etheron in a desolate part of her world, a stretch of barren land where time seemed to fold and twist around them. Etheron was waiting for them, his face obscured by a dark, shimmering mask, his voice echoing in a low, menacing tone. "Ah, Max Kane," Etheron greeted, his tone mocking. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing more than a fly caught in my web." Max raised his chin defiantly. "I'm here to protect reality. Your vision has no place in any timeline." Etheron laughed, the sound chilling and hollow. With a flick of his hand, he summoned a temporal anomaly, a loop of time that trapped Lady Ironclad in an endless cycle, forcing her to relive the same seconds over and over. Max barely managed to pull her free, but the encounter left them shaken and disoriented. Etheron was no ordinary villain. He wielded time as if it were clay, shaping and twisting it to his will. After the battle, Lady Ironclad warned Max that his every movement across timelines risked further destabilizing the multiverse. "Each time you jump, you're weakening the barriers that separate us," she said gravely. "You must tread carefully." But Max knew he couldn't stop. Every time he returned to his own timeline, he felt Etheron's influence spreading further, each fracture widening, each reality bending ever closer to collapse. He was in a race against time itself, and he couldn't afford to lose. In the next world, Max found himself in a dystopian metropolis, where towering skyscrapers loomed over streets bathed in perpetual neon light. It was a cold, sterile world, devoid of color save for the glaring lights and the faces of people hardened by survival. Here, he met another version of himself, a dark, brooding vigilante who wore his time-travel device as a weapon. This Max was ruthless, a shadowy figure who prowled the night, his face hidden by a mask that seemed to shift with each step. "You don't belong here," Dark Max said, his voice a harsh whisper as he pulled Max into a dim alley. "This world has enough trouble without a double-crossing into it." Max explained his purpose, how he was gathering allies to stop Etheron. Dark Max listened, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, Max feared he would turn him away. But then Dark Max nodded, a slow, reluctant gesture. "Etheron won't be defeated by brute force," Dark Max warned. "He's smarter than that. You'll need more than just power, you'll need to outthink him." Together, they worked to uncover Etheron's next move, but their plans were constantly thwarted. Etheron seemed to anticipate their every action, twisting time around them, creating endless loops and paradoxes that ensnared them at every turn. It was a battle of wits, each move calculated, each action met with a counteraction. And as they fought, Max realized that every jump, every new ally, was only giving Etheron more control, his influence spreading like a shadow over the multiverse. In the end, Dark Max handed Max a device, a piece of alien technology he had salvaged from a previous encounter with Etheron. "It's not much," he said, his tone reluctant, "but it'll give you a fighting chance. Use it wisely." As Max left that world, he felt the weight of his mission grow heavier. Each ally he gained, each new tactic he learned, only seemed to bring him closer to the inevitable realization that Etheron was always one step ahead. And now, he had a choice: continue his journey across timelines, risking collapse with every jump, or find another way, a path that didn't rely on brute force. But as he stood at the edge of his next journey, he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't give up. Not when the future of every reality was at stake. As Max activated the device Dark Max had given him, he felt a strange sensation wash over him, a sense of merging, of becoming more than just a single version of himself. It was as if the device were attuning him to the resonance of every other Max Kane across the multiverse, aligning him with their collective resolve, their shared determination. For a moment, he glimpsed their lives. One was a scientist who had dedicated his life to protecting the environment, another a vigilante fighting for justice in a dystopian world, and yet another a quiet, unassuming man who had never discovered his powers but still found ways to make a difference in his own small corner of existence. This unity filled him with renewed strength as he opened a portal to the next universe. A stark, otherworldly reality where the very fabric of time seemed to pulsate with an eerie glow. He stepped out onto an endless plain, dotted with shards of reflective crystal that floated mid-air, casting distorted reflections of him back at himself. Here, time didn't flow in a single direction. Instead, it rippled, overlapping and intersecting in unpredictable ways. Ahead of him, he saw Etheron waiting. The villain's form seemed more solid here, his dark cloak trailing like smoke, his face partially obscured by a mask that gleamed with an otherworldly light. Max could sense the temporal anchor somewhere nearby, pulsating with the same alien energy that permeated this place. Etheron's temporal anchor was what allowed him to exist outside the constraints of time, making him nearly invincible. Destroying it would be Max's only chance. "You're more persistent than I anticipated, Max Kane," Etheron said, his voice carrying a strange, harmonic resonance, as if it were layered over countless other voices. Mechs gritted his teeth. You can't bend every timeline to your will, Etheron. Each universe has its own fate, its own identity. You have no right to impose your vision on them. Etheron laughed, a cold, hollow sound. And what is freedom, Mechs, but the illusion of control? Left unchecked, these timelines will continue to spiral into chaos. I am merely providing order, a single, unified existence that will prevent reality from tearing itself apart. Mechs stepped forward, his fists clenched. You're not unifying anything. You're erasing the choices and lives that make each timeline unique. I won't let you turn existence into a prison. Etheron's eyes narrowed beneath his mask, and with a flick of his wrist, he summoned a wave of temporal distortion that rolled toward Mechs. Time seemed to buckle and twist as it approached, but Mechs stood his ground. With the device Dark Mechs had given him, he reached out, stabilizing his own temporal field and countering Etheron's attack. He could feel the strain, the pull of the distortion as it tried to wrap around him, but he held firm, pushing it back with every ounce of his strength. Etheron's expression shifted, and for the first time, Mechs thought he saw a hint of surprise flicker across the villain's face. You've grown stronger, Etheron murmured, almost to himself. But strength alone won't be enough. Before Mechs could respond, Etheron raised his hands, and the ground beneath them shifted, revealing an array of alternate versions of himself and Mechs, each locked in a loop, repeating the same movements, the same expressions, over and over. Mechs watched, horrified, as he saw the echoes of himself trapped in countless repeating moments, their lives reduced to endless cycles of futility. This is the fate that awaits all who oppose me, Etheron said softly, his gaze fixed on Mechs. Time is a river, Mechs. You can't fight its current forever. Eventually, you will succumb. Mechs felt his resolve harden. He wasn't just fighting for his own timeline, he was fighting for every life, every possibility that had ever existed. Summoning every lesson he'd learned from his allies, he lunged forward, his device glowing with a fierce intensity as he aimed for Etheron's anchor. Etheron reacted swiftly, summoning a barrier of temporal energy that deflected Mechs' attack, but Mechs was relentless. He dodged and weaved, each movement a calculated maneuver that drew on the skills he'd gained from Lady Ironclad, Dark Mechs, and the other heroes he'd encountered. Their lessons resonated within him, guiding his every step, every strike. As their battle raged on, Etheron's once unbreakable confidence began to waver. His attacks grew more desperate, his movements erratic as he struggled to keep up with Mechs' relentless assault. Finally, in a moment of vulnerability, Mechs saw his opening, a brief gap in Etheron's defenses, a single moment when the villain's guard was down. With a surge of determination, Mechs lunged forward, his hand closing around the anchor. The device pulsed violently, radiating waves of energy that seared his skin, but he held tight, refusing to let go. Etheron's eyes widened in shock, and he reached out, clawing at Mechs' arm, but it was too late. With one final effort, Mechs tore the anchor from Etheron's grasp and crushed it in his hand. Etheron let out a scream, a sound that reverberated through the very fabric of reality as his form began to waver, his body unraveling like threads pulled from a tapestry. For a brief moment, Mechs saw the man beneath the mask, a figure consumed by fear, by a desperate need for control. And then, in a flash of light, Etheron was gone, his presence erased from existence. Mechs fell to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. The temporal anchor's destruction had taken a toll, and he could feel the strain of every timeline he had traversed pressing down on him, a weight that threatened to overwhelm him. But he knew he couldn't rest yet. There was still one last task to complete, drawing on the last reserves of his strength. Max activated his device and reached out across the timelines, sending a pulse that would stabilize the fractures, sealing the rifts that Etheron had created. He watched as the shimmering cracks in reality began to mend, each one slowly fading until the multiverse was whole once more. When he finally returned to his own timeline, he felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The timelines were safe, each one free to follow its own path, its own destiny. He had saved them all, not by imposing control, but by protecting their right to exist as they were. As he stood there, gazing out at the familiar landscape of his world, Max thought about the allies he had met, the lessons they had taught him. He knew he would carry their memories with him, a reminder of the countless lives he had fought to protect, and though he would never again use his powers recklessly, he understood that there would always be threats lurking in the shadows of time. But he was ready, prepared to defend the multiverse with every ounce of strength he possessed. With a final, deep breath, Max deactivated the device and walked away, leaving the mysteries of time to unfold as they would, free and unbound, a tapestry of infinite possibilities stretching out into eternity. The rumble of explosions shook the earth as dust and smoke drifted through the ruins of what was once the vibrant city of New York. Now, twisted metal and charred concrete dominated the landscape, a grim testament to the relentless onslaught of the Kraith. The invaders had come from the far reaches of the universe, a cold and calculating race that systematically dismantled humanity's last defenses. They weren't here to conquer but to harvest. The Earth's resources were the prize, its inhabitants mere obstacles. In the heart of an underground military bunker miles away, deep beneath a mountain, General Arthur Meyer looked at the last hope of a dying world. A stainless steel pod, sealed tight, stood under a harsh fluorescent light. Dust and grime coated its once polished surface. Inscribed on the side were faint words, barely visible but still commanding respect: Project Steel, humanity's last line of defense. The scientists had been preparing the pod for hours, adjusting controls, checking its life support systems. General Meyer observed with weary eyes, every line on his face etched with the weight of loss and desperation. Outside, the Kraith were closing in, their drones inching closer to uncovering the hidden bunker, ready to snuff out the last embers of humanity. Dr. Elena Voss, the project's chief scientist, approached the general, her face set with a look of grim determination. "It's time," she said, her voice steady but laced with apprehension. "Project Steel is our last chance. He'll need a full briefing as soon as he wakes." Meyer nodded, staring at the pod. "Let's hope he's ready for a world far darker than the one he left behind." Dr. Voss entered the final sequence, and with a deep, ominous hum, the pod's mechanisms began to shift. Steam hissed as the cryogenic locks disengaged. Inside, a figure stirred, breaking free from decades of slumber. The frost-covered glass slowly revealed the face of Ethan Steele, a warrior from an era of hope and promise, now thrust into an existence defined by ruin. The pod doors opened, and Steele's eyes fluttered open, his body stiff as he took his first breath in half a century. His gaze, sharp and calculating, met Meyer's. A brief silence passed between them, a silent understanding between soldier and commander. "Welcome back, Steele," Meyer said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "The world needs you." Steele blinked, shaking off the last remnants of cryosleep, his body already adapting, his muscles loosening as if he hadn't missed a single day in the fight. "How long?" he rasped, voice rusty from disuse. 50 years. "Earth. Earth isn't what you remember," Meyer replied, the weight of his words unmistakable. Steele straightened, his mind adjusting, absorbing the surroundings, his eyes taking in the bunker's somber, functional details, the stark walls, the anxious faces of the scientists, and, most of all, the desperation in the general's face. "What's the situation?" "Total invasion," Dr. Voss interjected, pulling up a holographic map showing the spread of alien strongholds across Earth's continents. "The Kraith. They arrived 20 years ago. Our weapons, nothing we've tried works against them. Their technology neutralizes everything, nuclear, EMP, even biochemical warfare. They came prepared for everything." Steele absorbed the information with a soldier's detached calm. Years of military training had taught him to set aside emotion, to act with precision and resolve. Yet the devastation etched into the faces around him stirred something deeper, a feeling of duty, the unyielding resolve to protect the remnants of humanity. General Meyer took a step closer, his voice lowering. "You're the last resort, Steele. Our ultimate weapon. Your biomechanical modifications, the adaptability, the transformation abilities, we need you to use them. You're the only one who can face the Kraith on their terms." Steele nodded slowly, testing his joints, his senses heightened as his body instinctively adapted to the environment. He could feel the energy coursing through his veins, the bio-enhancements kicking in, calibrating to the stark reality of a war-ravaged Earth. "What's the mission?" Meyer pulled up a tactical display. "There's a Kraith fortress in the ruins of Chicago. We believe it's a central hub controlling a vast network of their drones and biomachines. If we disable it, it could buy us time, create a gap in their network." Steele studied the hologram, memorizing every detail, every potential entry point and defensive structure. "Extraction?" "None," Meyer said, his face grim. "This is a one-way mission." Steele's expression didn't change, but a glint of determination flickered in his eyes. "Understood." Within minutes, he was suited up, the resistance fighters whispering among themselves as they caught glimpses of him moving down the bunker's narrow corridor. The stories of Project Steele had become a legend, a ghostly hope passed around in dark times, and now, to see him in the flesh stirred something almost forgotten, a flicker of courage. He boarded a stealth aircraft, piloted by a veteran resistance fighter named Dana, her face weathered but resolute. As they lifted off, Steele gazed out the window at the ruins below, his thoughts a mixture of grim reflection and steely resolve. "You don't talk much, do you?" Dana asked, her voice cutting through the silence. "Nothing to say," Steele replied, scanning the horizon, always vigilant. Dana shook her head, her expression unreadable. "Well, let's hope your actions speak louder than words." They flew under radar, skimming close to the ground, avoiding Kraith patrols as they made their way to Chicago. As they approached, the skeletal remains of the city came into view, a haunting silhouette of twisted skyscrapers and collapsed bridges. The fortress loomed in the distance, a hulking mass of alien metal, pulsating with an eerie blue light. Dana landed the aircraft in a secluded spot. Steele stepped out, feeling the energy from the fortress, his adaptive senses reacting, analyzing the environment, preparing him for the encounter ahead. Dana handed him a small device, her eyes meeting his with a rare vulnerability. "Good luck, Steele. For what it's worth, the world's counting on you." Steele nodded, gripping the device as he made his way toward the fortress. He moved silently, his body shifting, adapting to the darkened ruins around him. His skin took on the hue of the debris, blending seamlessly into the shadows as he crept forward. He felt his body change, his muscles elongating, enhancing his reflexes as he slipped past Kraith patrols undetected. Near the fortress entrance, he paused, observing the drones guarding it, sleek, silver machines that hovered with an almost silent hum. He analyzed their patterns, waiting for the perfect moment before darting forward, his body morphing to a leaner, faster form. With precise, deadly efficiency, he neutralized 2 drones with a swift motion, moving toward the access hatch. Inside, the air was thick with a sterile, metallic scent. The architecture was unlike anything human, a maze of shifting walls and glowing panels. Steele adjusted his vision, his eyes adapting to detect alien energy signatures, guiding him through the labyrinthine corridors. His body became lighter, more agile, adapting to the strange gravity within the fortress. As he moved deeper, the Kraith defenses became more intricate, with biomechanical guards and automated turrets lining the hallways. Steele's body responded instinctively, forming a hardened exoskeleton as he moved through the onslaught, deflecting blasts and returning fire with brutal precision. Every step brought him closer to the central command center, where he knew the heart of the alien operations pulsed. Finally, Steele reached the command room, a massive chamber filled with holographic displays and alien consoles. At the center stood a figure unlike the drones or guards, a Kraith commander, tall and imposing, its metallic skin gleaming under the harsh lights. Its eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Steele. "So, humanity's last soldier," the Kraith commander spoke, its voice a metallic echo. "I wondered when you would arrive." Steele didn't reply, his focus razor-sharp, analyzing his opponent's movements, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. "You are a relic," the commander continued, circling him slowly. "Your kind clings to hope, to futile resistance, yet you are outmatched. Your world is ours." Steele's expression remained steely, but his body shifted subtly, adapting to the commander's energy signature, preparing for the fight. "As long as I stand," he replied, his voice low and defiant, "this world isn't yours." The commander lunged, its body transforming mid-air, arms elongating into razor-sharp blades. Steele countered, his own arms shifting into reinforced shields, deflecting the attack and delivering a brutal counterblow. The clash was fierce and unrelenting, each strike testing the limits of his adaptability. The commander matched him move for move, a relentless opponent with no hesitation, no mercy. Steele's body responded with every impact, his form shifting to counter each of the alien's attacks. He absorbed the energy blasts, redirecting them back at the commander, his mind and body working in perfect unison. The room shook as they fought, a violent storm of power and resilience, but as the battle wore on, Steele began to falter, his body pushed to its limits. The commander's adaptability. The commander's adaptability proved a near match for Steele's abilities, each new attack feeling like a violent test of his limits. With each passing moment, Steele felt the strain deepening, his muscles burned, and his energy reserves dwindled as the alien commander seemed to draw strength from the very air around them. But Steele was no ordinary soldier. He was crafted to endure, to adapt beyond what any normal human could withstand. In a final burst of resolve, he pushed his body to absorb the alien energy pulses directly. The commander hesitated, as if calculating this unprecedented move, watching Steele's form glow faintly with the stored energy. Steele could feel the power within him shifting, transforming his skin to a hardened alloy, his arms morphing into something fierce and jagged. With a roar, Steele lunged, catching the commander off guard. His fist, now a metallic weapon of immense density, connected with the alien's head, sending it crashing against the control panel. Sparks flew, and the energy in the room fluctuated wildly. Alarms sounded as the fortress's systems began to overload. The Kraith commander staggered, its once perfect form dented and cracked, a strange liquid oozing from its wounds. "You cannot stop us," the commander rasped, its voice distorted, weakened but unyielding. Steele narrowed his gaze, his body responding with one last shift, adapting to the command center's power grid. With a single, deliberate motion, he slammed his hand into the panel, channeling the fortress's energy directly into himself. His entire being blazed with light, each muscle and cell fortified with the raw power of the Kraitha's technology. The commander's eyes widened in alarm, realizing, perhaps too late, that steel's adaptability was beyond its calculations. The final blow was swift, decisive. Steel's body, supercharged and unstoppable, drove through the commander's chest, severing its energy core. The alien let out a guttural, metallic scream, a sound that echoed through the fortress, signaling its downfall. The commander's body collapsed in a heap, lifeless, its essence dissipating like smoke into the air. Steel pulled his hand back. He felt a shudder run through the entire fortress. The walls trembled, and the lights flickered as the alien technology began to fail without its central command. He could feel his body thrumming with the alien energy he'd absorbed, his own form now a strange fusion of human and Kraith. He'd won the battle, but he knew he couldn't stay much longer. Steel sprinted through the corridors, his adaptive senses guiding him past collapsing structures and malfunctioning defenses. The fortress was tearing itself apart, a chain reaction triggered by the loss of its command center. He reached the exit and leapt through, just as the entire structure exploded in a blinding flash of blue light, sending shockwaves rippling across the desolate landscape. Steel lay on the ground, watching the remnants of the fortress dissolve into dust. He felt a strange hollowness, a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. His body, still thrumming with alien energy, was a constant reminder of how much he'd changed, how far he'd strayed from the man he once was. In the distance, he could hear the faint hum of approaching engines. He recognized the Resistance aircraft's sound before he even saw it. Dana's ship descended, hovering just above the ground, her expression a mixture of relief and awe as she saw him standing alone amidst the wreckage. "Get in," she called, extending her hand. Steel took a last look at the ruins of the fortress, then climbed aboard. The door shut behind him, sealing him back into the relative safety of the transport. As they took off, Steel slumped back, feeling the weight of his actions settling over him. He'd destroyed a significant stronghold, dealt a serious blow to the Kraith. But it wasn't victory, not yet. The war was far from over. Back at the bunker, General Meyer greeted him with a grim smile. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're seeing signs of Kraith forces pulling back in some sectors. Whatever you did, it worked." Steel nodded, though he felt little satisfaction. "It's only temporary. They'll regroup." Meyer looked at him, a silent understanding passing between them. "Then we'll fight again when they do." Steel's gaze drifted over the gathered Resistance fighters, their faces etched with hope and determination. He knew that each of them was depending on him, seeing him as something more than human, as a legend come to life. But Steel wasn't sure he wanted that mantle. He was just a soldier, a man carrying the weight of survival on his transformed shoulders. Days passed, and Steel threw himself into training the Resistance, teaching them to adapt and react with precision. His own body continued to evolve, adjusting to the alien energy he'd absorbed. He found he could manipulate it in subtle ways, generating small pulses of force or sharpening his reflexes to superhuman levels. The scientists observed him with a mix of fascination and caution, knowing he was becoming something beyond their comprehension. One night, alone in the bunker's cold, dim corridors, Steel found himself questioning his place in this new world. He'd been created for a war long past, designed to be a weapon against an enemy humanity could understand. But now, facing the Kraith, facing beings that defied conventional logic and strategy, he felt like an anomaly, a relic struggling to keep up with a conflict that constantly evolved. In those quiet moments, he thought of the life he'd left behind, of the world he'd known. It felt like a distant dream, something untouched by the destruction and despair surrounding him. He knew he couldn't go back. There was no place for him in the world he'd once called home. His purpose was here, in this war, fighting for the remnants of humanity with every fiber of his adapted being. The next offensive came swiftly. Reports flooded in that the Kraith had deployed a new wave of drones, faster and deadlier than before, equipped with adaptations mimicking Steele's own abilities. They were learning from him, adjusting their tactics, evolving in real time. Steele took to the battlefield again, his body responding instinctively as he faced off against the Kraith's improved forces. Every movement was a dance of survival, each adaptation a new step in an endless war of attrition. The resistance fought valiantly by his side, their courage bolstered by his presence, but he knew that each victory only prolonged the inevitable. During one particularly brutal skirmish, Steele found himself surrounded, cut off from his team as the drones closed in. He pushed his body beyond its limits, shifting his form in ways he'd never attempted before, stretching his adaptability to the breaking point. He could feel something fraying within him, the strain of his enhancements pushing him perilously close to collapse, but then, in the midst of the chaos, he saw it, a weakness in the drones, a vulnerability he could exploit. He channeled every last ounce of energy, driving himself forward, tearing through the enemy with a fury that defied logic. When the dust finally settled, he stood alone, victorious yet hollow, each victory stripping away another piece of the man he'd once been. The resistance cheered, their cries echoing across the battlefield, but Steele barely heard them. His gaze drifted to the horizon, where the faint glow of the Kraith's main fleet loomed, a reminder of the true enemy that still awaited him. In the following weeks, Steele continued his relentless push against the Kraith, each encounter a test of his endurance and resolve. He became a symbol, a rallying point for the survivors, the last spark of hope in a world overshadowed by despair. But with each battle, he felt himself slipping further from his humanity, his body and mind irrevocably altered by the alien forces he'd absorbed. One night, as he stared into the darkness, he realized the truth: he was no longer entirely human. He was a hybrid, a fusion of Earth and Kraith, a living embodiment of the war that had ravaged his world. The thought should have filled him with dread, but instead, it brought a strange sense of peace. He was what he needed to be, a weapon, a protector, a beacon in the darkness. When the final assault on the Kraith's flagship began, Steele led the charge, his body a blur of power and precision as he tore through the enemy ranks. The resistance fighters followed him, their faith unwavering, their determination fierce. Together, they fought with a ferocity born of desperation, pushing forward even as the odds stacked against them. At the heart of the Kraith's flagship, Steele faced the alien commander one last time. The being stood tall, its form a shimmering mass of energy and metal, an embodiment of the Kraith's adaptability. They clashed in a brutal, silent struggle, each blow a testament to their resilience. In the end, it was Steele's humanity that tipped the balance. With a final, defiant surge, he drove his hand into the commander's core, channeling every ounce of energy he'd absorbed, sacrificing himself to bring down the Kraith once and for all. The flagship exploded in a blinding flash, the Kraith's forces scattering as their command structure disintegrated. Steele's form flickered in the light, his body dissolving into the energy he'd harnessed, his last act a silent farewell to the world he'd fought so hard to protect. When the dust settled, the resistance emerged victorious. The Kraith were defeated, their invasion thwarted. But Steele was gone, his memory etched into the minds of those he'd saved, a legend, a hero, a warrior who'd given everything for humanity's survival. In the quiet aftermath, the survivors rebuilt, carrying with them the lessons of Steele's sacrifice. He had shown them what it meant to fight, to adapt, to endure. And in his final act, he had given them the one thing they'd lost so long ago: hope. The horizon floated in the silence of space, a gleaming testament to human ambition. Its sleek structure reflected the surrounding starlight, casting beams that stretched like celestial fingers toward the distant, hungry void of the black hole. The crew's mission was to approach the event horizon closer than any spacecraft before them, gathering data that would push the boundaries of human knowledge and, hopefully, return safely. But for Commander Alex Reed, this was more than just a scientific mission. It was a journey that had haunted his dreams for years. Alex sat in the command chair, eyes fixed on the black hole's swirling edge on the screen in front of him. It was mesmerizing, a swirling maw of darkness devouring stars, a silent, endless hunger that demanded reverence. His heart pounded as he listened to the gentle hum of the ship and the quiet chatter of his crew in the background. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "You okay, Commander?" A voice broke the silence, snapping him from his trance. That he glanced to his right, where Lieutenant Marissa Chen, his second in command, was watching him with a mixture of concern and admiration. She'd known Alex long enough to recognize when he was lost in thought. "Yeah, just something about it, you know?" Alex replied, giving her a reassuring smile. "This is what we came here for. It's surreal to be this close." Marissa nodded, her gaze drifting back to the screen. "It's beautiful. In a terrifying kind of way." "Couldn't agree more," Alex muttered, gripping the armrests as the horizon inched closer. He knew they were still safe, well outside the event horizon, but he couldn't shake the feeling of standing on the edge of an abyss. The ship's instruments began to beep, pulling him back into focus. "Keep monitoring the gravitational waves," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. "And make sure our readings are stable." "Yes, Commander," Marissa replied, moving to the console beside him. As the ship drew closer, a sudden tremor coursed through the horizon, sending a jolt through the entire crew. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered. Alex's heart leaped as he tightened his grip on the armrests. "What the hell was that?" he barked, eyes darting across the control panels. "Unstable gravitational field, Commander," one of the technicians called out, panic in his voice. "We're getting hit by a wave from the black hole." "Stabilize the ship," Alex shouted. "And prepare for an emergency response protocol." The ship shuddered again, a violent lurch that threw them off balance. Alex steadied himself, adrenaline spiking as he activated his suit's magnetic stabilizers. The black hole's gravity had reached out like a dark hand, gripping the horizon with unseen fingers. "Commander." Marissa's voice broke through the alarms. "We're going to lose structural integrity if this keeps up." "We're not losing this ship," Alex growled. He glanced at the console, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. There was only one option left. "I'm going out there." "Are you insane?" Marissa's eyes widened. "The gravitational waves, I know," he interrupted, his tone firm. "But we don't have time to argue. If we lose propulsion, we're done for." He pushed himself up from the chair, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Moving swiftly, he suited up, the ship's gravity stabilizers keeping him grounded as he headed to the airlock. Outside, the black hole pulsed, its energy rippling like a silent heartbeat in the vacuum of space. As he exited the ship, the darkness pressed against him, almost tangible. He maneuvered along the exterior, hands steady despite the rattling force from the gravitational waves. Just as he reached the damaged panel, another wave hit, a surge so intense it knocked him back. He felt the tremor all the way through his bones, and then, a blast of radiation washed over him, a burst from the black hole that seemed to pierce his very being. Pain flared through his body, every nerve on fire. His vision blurred as he tumbled through space, his breath catching in his throat. "Commander, come in." Marissa's voice crackled over his earpiece, but he barely heard her. The darkness swallowed him, and everything went silent. When Alex opened his eyes, he was lying in a sterile hospital bed back on Earth. His mind swirled with fragments of memory, broken images of the black hole's pull and the void stretching endlessly around him. He groaned, the weight of reality settling back onto his shoulders. "Commander, you're awake," a soft voice said, pulling him from his haze. He turned his head, finding Dr. Evelyn Shaw watching him with a curious intensity. Her face was calm, her gaze sharp as she assessed him. "What happened?" he asked, his throat dry. "You were exposed to a gravitational surge unlike anything we've seen," she replied, her voice measured. "The energy readings from the black hole spiked just as you were outside the ship. You're lucky to be alive." Alex took a shaky breath, trying to process her words. But something felt off. The room seemed lighter. He furrowed his brow, noticing a strange sensation in his body, a tingling under his skin. "Doctor, something feels different," he whispered, flexing his fingers as if testing them for the first time. Evelyn watched him closely, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "That's what we need to talk about," she said, her tone shifting to a mix of intrigue and caution. "Since you've been back, we've observed anomalies in the gravitational field around you." "What do you mean?" he asked, a knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. "Alex," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "you're manipulating gravity." He froze, disbelief washing over him. "That's impossible." But as the words left his mouth, the weightless sensation intensified. He looked down, watching in shock as a small cup on the bedside table lifted, hovering in the air for a brief, surreal moment before dropping back down. His breath hitched. It was true. Somehow, he'd returned from the black hole changed. Days passed, and Alex found himself experimenting with his newfound powers in the secrecy of his apartment. At first, he could barely control it. Objects would levitate without warning, and he struggled to contain the strange force surging through him. It was as if he were a conduit for the black hole's energy, each attempt pulling him deeper into the void. Late one night, as he focused on a pen floating in midair, a sudden wave of pain struck him. He gasped, clutching his head as an image flashed across his mind, a vision of the black hole, swirling and pulsing with a strange intelligence, as if it were alive. He saw shapes shifting in the darkness, figures moving with purpose. When the vision faded, he sat there, shaken. He couldn't deny it any longer. Whatever had happened to him during that mission had left him connected to the black hole in ways he didn't understand. But just as he began to come to terms with his abilities, a knock on his door jolted him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Dr. Shaw standing there, her face grave. "Alex, we need to talk. Now." Seated across from her at his kitchen table, Alex listened in silence as she explained. "There's a group," she said, her voice low and serious. "The Celestial Order. They believe the black hole holds the key to humanity's evolution. They want to expand its reach, pull the entire solar system into it." He felt a chill run down his spine. Why would anyone want that? "They think they can harness its power, but they're playing with forces they don't understand," she replied. "We've been monitoring them for years, but they've gone underground. And now, they're aware of you." He frowned, struggling to process her words. "What do you mean?" "They know about your powers, Alex. They see you as the missing piece of their plan." As he sat there, the weight of his situation pressed down on him like a physical force. The black hole had given him incredible abilities, But now those powers painted a target on his back. Alex sat in stunned silence, his mind racing as Dr. Shaw's words sank in. A rogue organization, the Celestial Order, thought he held the key to controlling one of the most dangerous forces in the universe. The weight of it pressed on him, heavy and unrelenting, like the gravity he now commanded. Alex, Dr. Shaw's voice was softer now, almost pleading. If they get to you, if they can manipulate you or control your abilities, there's no telling what they might achieve. They could wipe out humanity without so much as a warning. He swallowed, his throat dry. Then what do we do? Dr. Shaw leaned forward, her eyes intense. We train. We get you to understand your power, to control it. To know its limits and, hopefully, how to push them if necessary. I'll have the resources you need, but you have to commit. The thought of training, of dedicating himself to this hidden, dangerous world, felt surreal. But as he looked at Dr. Shaw, he realized there was no choice. I'm in. The days that followed were grueling. Dr. Shaw arranged a remote training facility far from prying eyes, a stark concrete bunker that housed every tool and piece of equipment he'd need to explore his abilities. She kept the place well guarded, and even within its walls, they worked under the tightest security protocols. At first, Alex's progress was slow. The powers were erratic, responding more to his emotions than to conscious control. Frustration made objects shake, anger caused them to shatter, and once, in a moment of pure exhaustion, he even found himself levitating a few inches off the ground. But with time and rigorous practice, he learned to focus his mind, to steady his breathing and clear his thoughts before channeling the energy. He discovered he could create pockets of altered gravity, enough to pull or push objects with precision, even redirect them mid-air. He could make the air feel heavier in a room, increasing the pressure until even Dr. Shaw struggled to breathe. One night, during an intense training session, he found himself pushing his powers further than ever before. His hands trembled as he focused, a bead of sweat sliding down his face. He was attempting to alter the gravitational pull on a dense metal sphere, forcing it to stay suspended mid-air. As he increased his focus, the entire bunker seemed to groan, the walls warping slightly. He could feel the black hole's power within him surging to the surface, a dark, limitless energy pressing against his mind, and then, just as he thought he'd lost control, he saw something, another flash of that eerie, pulsing intelligence lurking within the black hole. This time, it wasn't just an image. He felt it probing him, reaching out across the vast distance, as if testing his resolve. He gasped, stumbling back as the sphere clattered to the ground, rolling to a stop. Dr. Shaw rushed over, concern etched across her face. What happened? It's alive, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The black hole. It's not just some cosmic anomaly, it's conscious, somehow. I could feel it watching me. Her expression shifted from concern to alarm. That's impossible. Maybe. But if it's true, then everything we know about black holes is wrong. And if the Order gets what they want, if they activate this thing, he didn't need to finish the thought. The consequences were too catastrophic to imagine. The days stretched into weeks, with each new skill he mastered bringing him closer to understanding the true scope of his powers. But with progress came risk. His abilities drained him, leaving him with splitting headaches, his muscles aching, his vision swimming with strange patterns he couldn't shake. Then, one afternoon, Dr. Shaw approached him with a grim look. The Order has resurfaced, she said, holding up a grainy satellite image. It showed a remote, heavily fortified compound hidden deep in the mountains. This is where they're hiding. And we think they're building a device to amplify the gravitational waves from the black hole. Alex clenched his fists, his mind racing. They're going to use the black hole to pull Earth into it, aren't they? Not just Earth, she replied, her tone grim. The entire solar system. The reality of what they were up against felt like a punch to the gut. We can't let that happen. Together, they devised a plan. Dr. Shaw would handle the logistics, organizing a small, elite team to infiltrate the Order's compound. But the final task, the disabling of their device, would fall to Alex. He was the only one with the power to neutralize the gravitational waves without destroying the area. It was a risky plan, but it was the only chance they had. As the team prepared, Alex took one last look around the training facility, his mind replaying the countless hours of practice, the sacrifices, and the pain. He was ready. When they arrived near the Order's compound, the tension was palpable. Under the cover of night, they moved in silence, each step heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. As they neared the perimeter, Alex felt the now familiar tug of gravitational energy. It was faint but unmistakable, a ripple in the fabric of space that only he could feel. The compound was surrounded by thick walls, armed guards patrolling every corner. Alex could sense the gravitational fluctuations radiating from the center, like a heartbeat pulsing through the ground. The Order's machine was active. They slipped through the shadows, avoiding detection as they made their way toward the central building. Dr. Shaw directed them over comms, her voice steady but tense. They were close, so close that Alex could feel the gravitational pull strengthening, resonating with his own powers in a way that made his skin prickle. Inside, the machine was a monstrous contraption, an array of massive metal arms encircling a central core that glowed with an ominous energy. The entire setup hummed with a low, bone-rattling vibration, filling the air with a static charge. As Alex approached, he felt his powers responding instinctively, aligning with the machine's pull. He closed his eyes, focusing on the gravitational field, feeling it bend and twist in ways that defied logic. The black hole's energy surged through him, a dark current that threatened to overwhelm his senses. Suddenly, a voice rang out from across the room, "Commander Reed. We meet at last." Alex's eyes snapped open to find a man standing on a raised platform, his silhouette sharp against the glow of the machine. He was tall, imposing, with a cold, calculating gaze. Alex recognized him from the intel they'd gathered, a former physicist, Dr. Adrian Hall, who had become the Order's leader. "Hall," Alex said, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Oh, I think I do," Hall replied, his tone dripping with disdain. "The black hole is the ultimate power source, a doorway to forces beyond human comprehension. And you, Commander, are the key." Alex braced himself, feeling the gravitational pull intensify as Hall activated the machine. The air around him seemed to warp, the pressure mounting until he struggled to breathe. Hall's voice echoed, mocking. "Ironic, isn't it? You came here to stop us, but you're exactly what we need to complete the activation. Your connection to the black hole, it's the final piece." Alex's vision blurred as the machine's energy twisted around him, and he could feel himself slipping, his powers draining. But he forced himself to focus, to channel every ounce of his strength into resisting the gravitational waves. "You're wrong," he gritted out, his voice strained. "I control it, not you." With a final surge of effort, he broke free from the machine's pull, the energy snapping back like a rubber band. He could feel his power building, raw and potent, a force ready to be unleashed. The room shook as he unleashed a gravitational shockwave, the force ripping through the compound and sending equipment crashing to the floor. Hall stumbled, his expression twisting into one of pure rage. "You can't stop it," he shouted, scrambling to his feet as the machine began to overload, sparks flying as its systems went haywire, but Alex was beyond words. He reached deep into the well of energy within him, feeling the black hole's presence guiding him, strengthening him. With a fierce, focused determination, he directed the gravitational waves at the machine, destabilizing its core. A deafening roar filled the room as the machine imploded, collapsing under its own weight before vanishing in a blinding flash of light. The gravitational field around them faded, the pressure easing as the room settled into silence. Hall lay motionless on the floor, defeated, his plans shattered. Alex took a shaky breath, the exhaustion hitting him like a wave. He could feel the last remnants of the black hole's energy fading, leaving him hollow but relieved. As he staggered toward the exit, Dr. Shaw appeared, her face a mix of relief and admiration. "You did it," she murmured, her voice barely audible. He managed a weak smile, the weight of everything settling on his shoulders. "It's over." But as they stepped outside, a part of him knew it was only the beginning. The black hole's power was still there, somewhere in the depths of the universe, waiting. And he, for better or worse, was forever bound to it. Ethan Hale moved like a wraith through the narrow, graffiti-streaked alley. His footsteps were silent, his breath controlled, and his presence all but erased as he hugged the building's edge, the shadows clinging to him as if he were part of them. His heart beat steadily, in sync with the city's dark rhythm, one he'd known intimately for as long as he could remember. Tonight, he had heard the cries for help, faint, desperate, echoing from blocks away. They were silenced now, but he had learned long ago not to ignore even the smallest sound in this city. Too often, they were the only signs left behind when predators in the night stalked their prey. He reached the mouth of the alley and paused, sensing movement beyond the dim streetlight's range. There, half concealed by the night, a figure was rifling through the pockets of a young woman slumped against a wall, her purse flung aside. The assailant glanced over his shoulder, sensing something was off, but it was too late. Ethan let the shadows pull him forward, his form almost blending with them as he closed in, silent as death. 1 second, he was mere darkness, and the next, he was right behind the man, his hand clasping the shoulder of the would-be thief. "Bad night to pick pockets," he murmured, his voice low but laced with danger. The man froze, then attempted to twist away, but Ethan tightened his grip, pushing him against the wall in a swift, fluid motion. He could feel the tension in the man's muscles, the fear in his rapid breaths. "Please, man, I didn't know. Take the money, and you'll find out," Ethan replied, his gaze hardening. The thief dropped the purse, scrambling to escape. Ethan let him go, watching the man disappear down the street before returning his attention to the young woman. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse weak but steady. She'd survive, though the encounter would leave her with a memory she'd likely prefer to forget. As he watched her for a moment longer, a familiar pang rose within him, an ache that reminded him how close he danced to the same edge as the predators he fought. He was a guardian, a vigilante, but one who hid within the city's shadows. No one thanked him, no one knew his face, but he had made his peace with that. It was better to be unseen. With a final glance, he faded back into the darkness, slipping through the city streets, searching for the next disturbance. But this time, there was something different in the night air, a tension he couldn't ignore. Days passed, and the city seemed to grow darker, not from a lack of light, but from a chilling atmosphere that seeped into its very bones. Crime reports surged, whispers of shadowy figures involved in robberies, kidnappings, and worse spread through the city. And each time Ethan investigated, he found eerie signs, graffiti and cryptic symbols, shadowy outlines scorched into walls, and a disturbing pattern of incidents that all pointed to something far more organized than simple street crime. His encounters grew increasingly strange. The criminals he faced were bolder, faster, and disturbingly proficient in using the shadows to disappear from sight. For the first time, Ethan felt as though he was chasing reflections of himself. It was in one such pursuit, at the scene of an attempted bank robbery, that he finally saw the face behind these incidents. Under the flickering neon lights of a downtown bank, Ethan spotted a tall, sharply dressed man with dark hair, observing the chaos unfolding in front of him. His expression was calm, confident, and disturbingly knowing, as though the havoc was merely a part of some grand plan. Ethan felt his muscles tense as the man turned and locked eyes with him, a faint, mocking smile playing on his lips. He gave Ethan a slight nod, then vanished into the shadows, as if they'd swallowed him whole. This man was no ordinary criminal. He was like Ethan. No, he was something darker. And as he learned later, this man had a name, Cassian Voss. The weeks that followed were an unrelenting battle for control of the city's night. Cassian's organization, known as the Veil, operated under a disturbing philosophy: those who could harness shadow power were meant to rule. Cassian claimed the city's dark underworld as his domain, and he was determined to make it his empire. The criminals under his sway were skilled, coordinated, and, worst of all, empowered by abilities eerily similar to Ethan's own. One night, as Ethan was investigating a recent crime scene, he encountered two members of the Veil. They were dressed in sleek, black combat gear and moved like specters through the shadows, each movement precise and deadly. Together, they were known as the Obsidian Twins, a pair of assassins whose skill with shadow manipulation rivaled his own. Ethan's breath caught as he realized they had surrounded him, blocking his only escape routes. "Didn't think you'd show up alone," one of the twins sneered, her voice low and venomous. Ethan smirked, masking his unease. "Figured it was enough to handle the two of you." With a nod, the twins launched their attack. Ethan ducked, shifting into the shadows as their strikes passed through the empty air where he'd stood. He moved quickly, but the twins were relentless, each one countering his maneuvers with chilling precision. It was like battling his reflection, a brutal reminder that he was no longer the only one with these abilities. After a tense and desperate struggle, Ethan managed to slip through their defenses, blending into the darkness just as he sensed them faltering. The twins hesitated, then retreated, fading into the night. But Ethan knew it wouldn't be long before they found him again. In the days that followed, he sought answers, determined to understand the extent of his powers and what gave the Veil their dangerous abilities. He found himself in old, forgotten archives, searching through ancient records of supernatural phenomena, cursed bloodlines, and tales of shadow-wielding sorcerers. And in one particularly obscure text, he found a name that sent a chill through him: the Shadowbound. According to legend, those known as the Shadowbound were descendants of an ancient clan cursed to dwell in darkness. Over generations, they had developed abilities tied to shadows, able to manipulate and even weaponize darkness itself. The curse was as much a gift as it was a chain, binding them to the shadows and preventing them from living fully in the light. Ethan shut the book, his mind racing. So this was his heritage, an inheritance that bound him to a life hidden from the world, always skirting the edges of society. But it also gave him strength, a bond to the shadows that others could only imitate. It was around this time that he met Maya Torres, a tenacious detective assigned to investigate the recent surge in shadow-related crimes. She had a knack for piecing together clues, and she was no stranger to chasing the city's mysteries. Their paths crossed when Maya tracked a gang of shadow-wielding criminals into an abandoned subway station, her sharp instincts driving her deeper into the dark. Ethan intervened just as she was about to be ambushed, pulling her into the shadows with him as the attackers searched for their prey. For a moment, he was acutely aware of her pulse racing, her breaths shallow. She was tough, but even she wasn't immune to fear in the presence of something so inexplicable. Who are you?" she whispered, her gaze wide with a mixture of terror and awe. He didn't answer, focusing instead on the attackers. But Maya wasn't easily deterred. She began piecing things together, noting his strange abilities, his familiarity with the criminals, and the way he moved as if shadows were a natural extension of his body. "You're like them," she murmured later, as they escaped into the night. "But you're fighting against them. Why?" He paused, her question echoing in his mind. "Because someone has to," he replied quietly, feeling the weight of his own words. It was a truth he had lived by, but hearing it out loud solidified his resolve. In the days that followed, Maya and Ethan formed an uneasy partnership. Her tenacity and resourcefulness complemented his powers, creating a synergy he hadn't anticipated. He'd worked alone for so long, but having someone by his side, a human ally, was strangely reassuring. For the first time, he felt connected, tethered to something beyond his own solitude. One evening, as they stood on the city's rooftop, Ethan opened up about the Veil and Cashin's plan to seize control of the city. Maya listened intently, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "Then we take them down," she said, her voice resolute. "We hit them where it hurts." They spent hours devising a plan, using Maya's knowledge of the city and Ethan's understanding of the Veil's tactics. They knew Cashin's gang would be planning a grand heist soon, one that would cripple the city's financial infrastructure and mark the beginning of his rule. When the night of the heist arrived, Ethan and Maya were ready. They infiltrated the building where Cashin's gang had gathered, blending into the shadows as they moved. Ethan could feel the familiar pull of darkness, a reminder of his own heritage, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the mission. As they navigated the building's labyrinthine corridors, Ethan felt his heart pound, both from the thrill of the hunt and from a growing sense of foreboding. The time had come to face Cashin and bring his reign of terror to an end. The hallway was eerily silent, and Ethan's footsteps echoed faintly against the walls as he moved through the shadows with practiced precision. Maya was close behind, her eyes sharp and alert. They were deep within Cashin's domain now, the heart of the building where the Veil's top enforcers operated. The dim emergency lights flickered overhead, casting erratic shadows that seemed to pulse with life. Ethan felt his senses heighten, his connection to the shadows growing stronger with every step. The Veil's power base was no ordinary place. It thrummed with a dark energy that felt almost alive. They approached a security room, where two guards sat in front of an array of monitors, oblivious to the presence lurking behind them. Ethan held up a hand to Maya, signaling for silence. He reached out, letting the shadows envelop his hands, and within seconds, the darkness extended outward, snaking along the floor and crawling up the legs of each guard. Before they could react, the shadows solidified, binding them in place. The guards' muffled struggles were brief. Ethan moved swiftly, disconnecting the cameras and plunging the security feeds into static. Maya gave him a nod of approval, and they continued down the corridor, navigating the maze-like structure with a shared, silent determination. As they rounded the corner, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing man with a cruel smile stretched across his face. Ethan recognized him immediately. One of the Obsidian twins. The man's eyes gleamed with malice as he spread his arms wide, as though welcoming a long-lost friend. "Didn't think you'd come this far, Hale," the twin sneered, his voice low and mocking. "Cashin sends his regards." The fight began without warning. Ethan surged forward, and the Obsidian twin mirrored his movements, their shadows colliding in a whirlwind of darkness. Ethan's fist struck with precision, but each time he landed a blow, the twin seemed to dissolve into shadow, reappearing elsewhere with a ghostly speed. The hallway filled with the sounds of their clash, the air thick with the scent of ozone as their powers collided. Maya watched, her fingers twitching, ready to intervene, but Ethan caught her eye, shaking his head. This fight was his. He focused, drawing on every ounce of his strength, letting the shadows consume him, until he was little more than a silhouette, indistinguishable from the darkness around him. The twin hesitated, sensing the shift, but it was too late. Ethan lunged, his hand piercing through the shadows to grab the man by the throat. With a final, crushing squeeze, Ethan released him, watching as the twin crumpled to the floor, unconscious. He turned to Maya, breathing heavily but victorious. She gave him a brief, approving nod, and together, they pressed onward. The corridors opened into a large, industrial-style chamber at the building's core. The space was dimly lit, but it was filled with the hum of machinery and the low murmur of voices. Dozens of Cashin's followers moved about, preparing equipment and coordinating the final stages of the heist. At the far end of the room, Cashin himself stood on a raised platform, observing his loyal followers with a satisfied gleam in his eyes. Ethan's fists clenched as he took in the scene, his gaze fixed on Cashin. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. The man who had brought chaos to the city, who had turned Ethan's own powers against him, was finally within reach, but Cashin's eyes met his across the room, and he raised a hand, signaling for his followers to stop. The room fell silent as he descended the steps, his movements slow and deliberate, his gaze never leaving Ethan's. Well, the city's mysterious protector finally shows himself, Cashin said, his voice smooth and taunting. I have to admit, I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd make it this far. Your little empire ends tonight, Ethan replied, his voice steady. I've had enough of your games, Cashin. Cashin chuckled, a low, sinister sound. Oh, Ethan, you still don't understand, do you? This city belongs to the shadows. It belongs to us. He extended his hands, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, coiling around him like serpents. Ethan could feel the pull, the dark energy thrumming through the air, but he steadied himself, drawing on his own connection to the shadows. He and Cashin stood at the center of a swirling maelstrom of darkness, each of them channeling their powers, each of them intent on emerging victorious. The fight was brutal. Cashin moved with a deadly grace, his strikes precise and calculated, each one aimed to exploit Ethan's weaknesses. Ethan countered with equal skill, his movements fluid and controlled, each strike infused with a determination that bordered on desperation. The room shook with the force of their battle, the machinery rattling as their shadows clashed in a storm of darkness. Cashin's followers backed away, watching in stunned silence as their leader fought against a rival who matched him blow for blow. Maya took advantage of the distraction, moving swiftly through the crowd, sabotaging equipment and dismantling weapons. She moved like a ghost, her presence barely noticeable amid the chaos, but her actions were decisive, crippling Cashin's operation from within. As the fight wore on, Ethan could feel his strength waning. Cashin was relentless, his power seemingly endless, and for a moment, doubt crept into Ethan's mind. But then he caught sight of Maya, her expression fierce and unwavering, and something inside him reignited. This wasn't just his fight, it was for the city, for the people he had sworn to protect, for the peace he had vowed to maintain. With a final surge of strength, Ethan let out a roar, channeling every ounce of his power into a single, devastating strike. Shadows erupted from him, surging forward like a tidal wave, and Cashin's smug expression faltered as he was engulfed by the darkness. When the shadows cleared, Cashin lay motionless on the floor, his followers staring in shock. The silence was palpable as Ethan stood over Cashin, his chest heaving, his body aching from the exertion. He looked around at the stunned faces of the Veil's followers, his gaze hard and unyielding. It's over, he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. The shadows belong to the city, not to those who would abuse them. One by one, Kashin's followers lowered their heads, their loyalty to their fallen leader broken. Maya stepped forward, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and relief. Together, they began the process of dismantling what remained of the Veil, ensuring that the city would no longer be plagued by shadowy crime. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow over the chamber, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The city was safe, at least for now. But he knew that his work was far from over. There would always be darkness lurking in the corners of the world, always shadows waiting to be confronted. Maya approached him, a soft smile on her lips. "You know, you don't have to do this alone," she said quietly. "You could always work in the light. There's a place for you, if you want it." Ethan looked at her, the warmth of her presence a stark contrast to the cold darkness he had known for so long. For a moment, he considered it, the possibility of stepping into the light, of living a life where he didn't have to hide, but he knew, deep down, that his path was different. "Someone has to guard the shadows," he replied, his voice soft but resolute. "Someone has to be there, in the darkness, watching." Maya nodded, understanding in her eyes. They stood together for a moment longer, two allies bound by a shared purpose, before Ethan turned and melted into the shadows, his figure disappearing as the sun rose over the city.